Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day-to-day, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be having a true crime marathon. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week like this week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Alright guys, let's go ahead and get into this video. This video is one of my compilation videos. I do about one of these a month. I upload every Monday, in case you are new here. A new true crime video on a case that I have not talked about before. I upload those every single Monday. I've never missed one since I started doing true crime, period. And once a month I put up one of these compilation videos because I have an issue with silence, and I have found from my community here that a lot of people that I know and who watch my channel have an issue with silence as well, and like to have a video on the background of their lives. Really, it's a soundtrack of their lives, which is crazy to me that I'm the person they choose to do that with, whether it be to put on when you fall asleep, to put on while you're doing the dishes, to put on when you leave the house so your dog has something to listen to. That's what this is for. So if that is you, if you're somebody who has an issue with silence or just wants a super long video to watch, or maybe this is your first video you're watching of mine and you're trying to figure out if I may be the person for you, this is for you. So just keep watching. And today we're going to be discussing the horrific murder of 14-year-old Grace Packer. This case is horrible, and this case was actually recommended to me by a member of the Brat Pack named Autumn. Hi Autumn, thank you Autumn. And it's going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a little bit more personal because Autumn was actually Grace's aunt. Grace's story broke my heart, her life, and then the end of her life broke my heart. And I'm just going to tell you that now so you know going into it, it's incredibly sad. So today I'm going to tell you that story. I read all the things so that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through all the details. But obviously I want you to answer it when you have more information. But the question of the day is this. Who do you believe was the mastermind in what happened to Grace? And do you believe that both parties involved should have gotten the death penalty? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the horrific murder of Grace Packer. And I want to start this video off with a quote. This is a quote from the DA who handled Grace's case. The DA said of Grace's murder, and I quote, "Her life ended in a house of horrors that became hell on earth. To him, she was less than human, a thing, something to act out his fantasies on." On October 31st, 2016, Halloween, a father and his son were driving down a road in Bear Creek Township, Pennsylvania, and they had the intention to do a little bit of hunting, which, hunting, spooky, very fitting for Halloween. I would never, but that's what they were going to do. They were going to go pheasant hunting. So they're driving down this road, they pull off, they start getting their stuff out, getting out of the car to do their hunting. And their dog gets out and seems to be alerted to something or smells something and kind of bolts. So the two chase the dog, obviously. The dog runs up this hill, they chase the dog up this hill, and the dog stops at like this pile of leaves at the top of the hill. And when they get there, they're shocked to find the torso and head of a female. Just the torso and the head. And at first, their brains kind of tricked them, like we hear in these stories constantly, and they thought it was a mannequin. But then one of them turned it over because it was laying face down. The torso and the head were laying face down. She was laying face down. So they turn her over, and that's when they find that, no, this is definitely not a mannequin. So cops were obviously called, and the area was cordoned off. When the cops got there, they were just kind of like, shit, because all they had was the head and torso of a female, and they really couldn't tell much about who this was by what they had. Like, they couldn't even tell her age or anything. They just knew that it was the nude torso of a female and that she had nothing with her. Even the earrings had been taken out of her ears. Like, her ears were pierced and the earrings were removed. And now they know that they have to like search this entire area because all they have is the head and the torso. There are no limbs. So they search and they search. And the following day, the search dogs, the like bloodhounds, the dogs, the helpful dogs, this is a bad sentence. The dogs lead police to an area where they find the arms and the legs. So all of these body parts were sent to the medical examiner so that they could look at it and figure out, like, what the fuck happened here and who was this? And they were able to get some information based on, like, the remains. They were able to tell, for one, that the body had not been where it was found for very long. Like, it had clearly, like, she had clearly been killed elsewhere, had been stored elsewhere for an extended amount of time, and then was brought to the area where she was discovered. And they were able to tell this because of, like, the insect activity or lack of insect activity, that she hadn't been where the hunters found her for very long. Now, at first, they actually believed that what they were looking at here was the body of a much older woman, because, for one, it had been months since she was killed, and so her features, her skin wasn't in, like, optimal condition, obviously. But on top of that, the hair on the head was actually gray, and they were able to determine that it was gray because drain cleaner had been poured on her face and her head, and we later find that this was in an attempt to melt her face off to make identification difficult. And the chemicals in this drain cleaner had, like, stripped the color from her hair. Despite this, though, despite it looking to be an older person, they were able to determine who the remains belonged to, and it didn't take them very long. They were able to tell this by dental records and also a medical implant. Like, there were records of a medical implant. And they were able to tell that this was actually the body of a 14-year-old girl named Grace Packer, who was reported missing months earlier. So now let's talk about who Grace Packer was. Grace Packer was actually born Susan Hunsaker, and she did not have an easy life. Like, my God, I could cry just thinking about it because she had a hard time from beginning to end. Life was not easy for her, and it definitely wasn't fair. She was born, again as Susan, prematurely to parents Rose and Rodney on August 14th, 2001. And when she was first born, she was so teeny. She was only 4 pounds, 5 ounces, and the doctors weren't even sure if she'd make it, or if she had made it, what sort of quality of life she would have. Fortunately, though, doctors were surprised to see that the baby survived through the night and then survived the next several nights. This little girl had this, like, blonde hair, these giant blue eyes, and this cute little baby smile, and her mother, Rose, said that the greatest gift God could give her was giving her her daughter. The baby girl continued to improve, so she was eventually able to go home with her parents and her siblings. I believe she was one of 3 kids. No, I know she was one of 3 kids. I believe that I know she was one of 3 kids. And she was so itty-bitty when she first went home that her parents actually dressed her in doll's clothes. Now, immediately upon being taken home, the rockiness started because there just was not a stable home life right from the beginning. And before she was even 1 year old, her and her siblings were taken from the home. They were taken away from their parents due to unsafe housing conditions and drug and criminal activity. I guess her parents did go on to get a new housing, different housing, because where they were living was where the unsafe conditions were. And I guess the people they were living with were the ones contributing to the criminal element, the drug element. So they got new housing. The kids were returned about a month later, and they were still getting in-home services, like, to make sure things were cool. But it was determined that somebody in the home, who was just described as a family member, like, there's a document I read about this and it's heavily redacted, but a family member was making the environment still unsafe. And it was believed that the parents, Rose and Rodney, did not have the capabilities to protect their children from this family member. So because of this, Grace, who was still Susan at this point, was removed from her family, from her parents' home again when she was just 3 years old, after allegations of abuse came out. And Grace was showing signs that she had most likely been sexually abused, like different things, different behaviors, things like that. But it was unclear on who may have done this or when this may have happened. It also seems that Grace's parents' mental states might have been a contributing factor to the removal as well, because they both had their issues. Rose had some mental health issues. She had bipolar disorder and anxiety, which are manageable issues, but she wasn't great at staying on her medication, which, you know, we see. People are on medication, they feel like they're doing better, they stop taking medication. It is a cycle. Mental health is very, very tricky to deal with because your brain is convincing you, right? It's your brain. In addition to that, Rodney, Grace's father, had some intellectual disabilities, and it seems like there was some domestic violence and abuse between the two of them as well, because there were several instances where Rose would apply for protection orders, but then like change her mind and go back on it. So clearly there was something causing her to go and get these protection orders, but then she was changing her mind and not going through with it. Now, it was said, like across the board from what I've seen, that Rose and Rodney weren't bad people. They were good people. They were respectful people. They just had their issues. They had their own issues, and they, you know, were in contact with this family member who had like a criminal history or a history in the criminal justice system. And so it was just really difficult for them to get on their feet because of the issues that they had. But they tried, right? They went out, they got a new place, and they tried to have enough to support their kids. But I guess the place they got was no good. It was like a really cheap place in this bad part of town, and it just wasn't safe for the kids, and they didn't have transportation. So they tried and they tried, they just couldn't get it together, and it's just very sad. Their attorney, who was helping them when the kids were taken away from them, said that the day that he learned that Rose and Rodney's parental rights were going to be stripped from them was like one of the hardest days of his career. He said that he believed that the couple had grounds for an appeal, but that they couldn't afford to continue with his services. And he wasn't, you know, willing to offer them pro bono work, which he doesn't have to. Would have been nice, but he doesn't have to. So he said that when he sat them down to tell them that they were losing their kids permanently, they were no longer going to be their legal parents, he said that Rose's first question, like she was confused, and her first question was like, okay, so then how long till I get them back? And he said that it was so difficult and so heartbreaking to have to tell her that she wasn't going to ever get her kids back, that he had to take the rest of the day off. He couldn't even continue working after that conversation. So with that, Grace and her siblings were permanently taken away from Rose and Rodney, and this was incredibly difficult for their mother. I guess Rose said that she remembered when she was leaving her kids saying that she would not say goodbye to them because she knew that was forever, and she couldn't bear to think that it was going to be forever, and that she just told them that she loved them and she would never forget them. Now, once Grace and her siblings were removed from the home, Rose did everything she could to see her kids still, but they struggled a lot after they lost their kids. I guess they struggled with homelessness for several years after this, and they even spent some time living in a tent in the woods. But despite this, Rose did everything she could to go to her visitation, because I guess she was able to see the kids 3 times a week at the foster care home, right? And it was during one of these visits that Rose actually met a woman named Sarah Packer, and this was a woman who was going to one day adopt her children, well, 2 of her children. And she said she thought Sarah was very nice. She was always dressed nice. She always had the kids dressed nice, and she thought that this was a good situation. She felt like her kids were taken care of, and they seemed happy. So the 3 kids spent some time in foster care before Grace, who was still Susan at this point, and her little brother were adopted by Sarah Packer and her husband, David. And it was at this point that Susan was officially named Grace. And it's actually very sad because I said they had 3 kids. Well, Rose's oldest daughter, Grace's older sister, was actually adopted by another family. And it's super sad that they were separated. I can't imagine how traumatic that would be. I feel like that's got to be super common, but she was adopted by somebody else. Grace and her brother were adopted by Sarah and David, and it was at this point that Rose lost all contact with her kids. Now Grace. Grace was said to be just a super sweet kid, a little girl with this big heart who had so much love for everyone around her. Those who knew her in school, she had went to Abington Junior High, said she was great. She was super nice, very friendly, made friends easily, and went out of her way to be kind to any kid who seemed to be having a hard time. Apparently there was this little boy named Jackie who had autism in school, and Grace always went and sat with him at lunch to make sure he wouldn't be alone. And he said that she was always patient, kind, and really pretty. Grace also had a friend named Kelsey who said that Grace was just the type of person who paid attention. She would notice you needed help and she would go out of her way to help you. She was the type of person that if she saw you crying, she would go up to you and give you a big hug and ask what she could do to make you feel better. She was like the type of girl who would go and help you with your homework. She loved butterflies. She loved to laugh and had a, quote, infectious little girl giggle. She loved playing with her friends and getting manicures and playing mini golf. She loved animals, especially cats. What little girl doesn't love cats? And she loved to swim, and she loved to read, and she loved hip-hop and country music and summertime. She was a little girl. One of Grace's foster sisters said of Grace after her death, and I quote, "Gracie was never in a bad mood. Gracie was always happy and fun, and she always wanted to be with the girls. She was warm. She would open her heart to anyone and everyone. If you gave her the chance, she would be your best friend." Grace was in 8th grade when she was killed, and she was super excited to be going into 9th grade because she knew when she did, she'd be able to get a cell phone. And she was just the type of person who cared deeply for others, and all she wanted in return was for people to care deeply for her. She wanted to be accepted. She just wanted to be loved and to belong. Now, along with all the great things Grace had going for her, she did also grow up with some issues. She had some trouble with certain things, which doesn't surprise me considering, you know, her start in life. Being in the foster care system definitely causes trauma for a lot of children, but she had her issues. And I don't know if it was due to her upbringing. I don't know if it was due to the fact that she was born prematurely, or maybe just this was like a genetic thing because, as I said, her father had learning disabilities, but Grace had learning disabilities as well. She grew up with an intellectual disability, and she also had a speech impediment at a young age. It didn't seem from the outside, though, that this was going to be much of an issue because the person who had adopted Grace, by all accounts, should have been a perfect match for Grace and for her specific needs, okay? And this was Sarah Packer. Sarah Packer had worked for Impact Project for a couple of years, and this was a private children and youth agency that offered a variety of programs to kids who were placed in foster care. She had also worked for the Northampton County Children and Youth Family Division, and both of these jobs gave her experience working with children, and specifically children who had been through the foster system. She had literally worked as a supervisor for adoption 4 years prior to adopting Grace and her brother. Sarah had also been a foster parent along with her husband, David, for a bunch of kids, so it seems like a perfect match. It seems super pure, right? Well, it's not, otherwise I wouldn't be talking about it here today. So basically, after Sarah had worked nearly a decade in that field, she ended up being suspended from her job without pay after some allegations of misconduct came out. And these were some pretty serious allegations. Apparently, it was reported that Sarah's husband, David, had been sexually abusing Grace, and not just Grace, other girls as well, for years, okay? And it's reported that these allegations happened between the years of 2006 and 2010. Now, you may remember from the beginning, Grace was born in 2001, so this would have been started happening when she was like 5 years old. And as I said, it wasn't just Grace. Another girl who was a foster child of the Packers came out later. I believe it was after Grace was killed, but she came out and she said that she too was abused sexually by David Packer. And she said that she believed that Sarah Packer knew it and just allowed it to happen. Now, the way all of this came out is that Sarah and David received another foster child, another little girl, and her name was Crystal. I don't know how old she was, but she was old enough to get there and be like, the vibes are fucking off. So she felt weird immediately. And one day she actually was like, I'm gonna figure out what's going on. And she took her foster father, David's cell phone. And she was going through his phone. And in his phone, she found photos and videos of him sexually abusing the little girl. Crystal saw something and she said something. And because of her, an investigation was, conducted into these allegations. And for whatever reason, it took 1.5 years for them to do this investigation, which seems like a lot, especially if they had physical proof in his phone, but whatever, that's what they did. And it turns out that he was just disgusting with this little girl. And this wasn't Grace. The one that was in the videos, it wasn't Grace, it was the other girl. And apparently what he would do is he would abuse her. He would tie her to her bed at night. He would tie her to a chair during the day. He moved her from the room that she was in before to a room that was directly next to his room that he shared with Sarah so that he could be closer to her. And he would make her diet, make her wear sexually revealing clothes, and then sexually abuse her. And this is in a house with foster parents. And as I'm sure you can imagine, this had lasting effects on her. As an adult, she had a lot of issues. She even tried to take her life on more than one occasion and was hospitalized for this. So the investigation was done into this. As I said, it took 1.5 years for whatever reason. And when they were done, it was concluded that yes, David had done these things. And he pled guilty to these crimes. Now, guess how much time he got? I would say pause and guess down below, but I don't know if you'll actually be able to make the guess. But if you want to, pause right now and put your guess down below on how much time he got for what he did. He got 6 months to 3 years for one of the counts, okay? And 1 year to 5 years for the other count. For raping children that were put into his care by the state. Let that sink in for a second. Now, after his release in 2016, because he was paroled, he had to register as a sex offender, and his life was rightfully turned upside down from everything that happened. Not only did he go to jail and he had all this happen, but his wife, Sarah, actually divorced him as well. Which I would say, good for you, Sarah, go Sarah. But I don't know if you can tell from my vibes, but Sarah is a bitch. I say with full disrespect, and I hate her. So when David was arrested, Sarah actually lost her job, which rightfully so. And she lost her ability to foster children, which good. That makes total sense. And at this time, Grace is 14 and her little brother is 12. And for whatever reason, these two kids are left in the custody of Sarah Packer. Why? I don't know. But they are. So they're living with Sarah, and they're living with Sarah's new boyfriend. This is a guy named Jacob. And they're living together in a place called Abington Township, Pennsylvania, which is a small community, small town of like 60,000 people. This is where Grace lived until July of 2016. And it was on July 11th of 2016 that Sarah Packer filed a missing persons report on Grace. On July 11th, 2016, Sarah Packer reported Grace missing. She told police at the time that Grace had been gone for 2 days. And she said that basically what happened is that her and Grace had gotten into an argument. I guess Grace wanted to go to a friend's house. Sarah told her no, so Grace got super pissed and like stomped off to her bedroom and didn't come out. She said the next morning at about 10 a.m., she went into the room to find that Grace was gone. She said that Grace had stolen $300 from her wallet and then just snuck out, left her bedroom with her backpack and her journal. She said that Grace was very strong-willed, very bratty, very grumpy, and would essentially get very hard-headed if she didn't get her way, which truly same. Now, Sarah said that she didn't report her missing right away because remember, she's been gone for 2 days at this point because this wasn't uncommon for Grace to do. She had a little bit of an attitude problem. She would often like run away and stay gone for a short period of time, but she always came back. But this time when she didn't come back, that's when they realized, her and her boyfriend realized, like, they should probably call the police. So with this, a report was reported. Sure. And the police spoke to the public at this point saying that they needed to be on the lookout for Grace. She was 14 years old and she was described as being 5'4", 185 pounds with brown hair and glasses. Now, they really didn't have a lot of evidence to go on. The only thing that they had was a letter. It was a hand-typed? Okay. It was a typed letter that was said to be typed by Grace, and this definitely strengthened the runaway theory. It corroborated what Sarah was saying happened. It basically said that Grace loved her mother and that she was sorry. She was sorry she was such a burden and such a disappointment, that she had a great life and she didn't, know why she was the way she was, but she had to let go. From there, Grace was missing for months until that October, that Halloween, when those two hunters found her dismembered body. And they were able to tell by looking at the body that she had been dead for quite a while, like months, pretty much the whole time she had been gone, and that she had been killed and stored elsewhere, obviously not in the place she was found because of the insect activity. And they were able to see that her remains were like really dried out. Like, in some reports, it was even described as like mummified, which we will get into. You'll see why when you find out where she had been stored all that time. And the only other thing they were really able to tell by the remains once she was found is that it was most likely a saw that was used to dismember her. Now, around the time that Grace's body was found, Sarah was actually arrested. She was charged with endangering the welfare of a child and obstructing the administration of law. And at this point, it hadn't been announced that Grace's body had been found, just that she was missing. So people were kind of like, why is she arrested? It was just a little bit strange. But don't worry, I'm going to answer that question for you now. She actually wasn't arrested for Grace's murder, but she was arrested because of how she had acted after Grace disappeared. And I truly think that they arrested her on these lesser charges so that they could further investigate her for the murder. Like, for example, if Grace had come home safe, I don't think they would have arrested her for how she acted after Grace disappeared, even though it was technically hindering an investigation. I think they were holding her so that they could look into her for murder. Basically, the reasons that they give, the listed reasons for the arrest, was a couple of things. One, that she had waited 2 days to report her daughter missing. And on top of that, she refused to give them a photo of Grace, like a recent photo, so that they could use it for their investigation. And it took them 2 months to get her to cooperate. English is hard. Took her 2 months to cooperate at all. Police would call her over and over. She would refuse to take their calls. And then when she finally would take their calls, she would give them inaccurate information, send them on wild goose chases, making the investigation difficult. Some might say impeding upon their investigation. Then, after reporting Grace missing, she straight up moved. She moved to the 900 block of East Cherry Road in Richland Township in Bucks County near Quakertown, which isn't something I'd do right after my kid disappeared. I feel like I might, I don't know, stick around in case they wanted to come home so that they'd have a home to come home to. But you know, that's just me. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I've never had a kid go missing. Thankfully. So she moved. She got rid of all of Grace's things. She took Grace's little brother, who was 12 at this point. She enrolled him in school, didn't enroll Grace in school, and didn't tell the cops she was leaving. She just left, and then they were forced to try to locate her. The police also thought it was weird because Sarah didn't seem worried about Grace like you would expect a parent to be of a missing child. Like, when they finally tracked her down, they were able to get her on the phone. They were like, hey, we want to get something from you that has Grace's DNA on it in case she's ever recovered deceased. We would like to be able to identify her. And she's like, super casual, like, oh, sure, no problem. I was actually going to call you and see how that, like, pesky missing persons report was going anyways. Oh, and remember that letter, that hand-typed letter, that typed letter that was written by Grace? Well, guess what? Shyamalan twist. It wasn't written by Grace. I'm sure you already knew that. It wasn't written by Grace. They were able to determine that this couldn't have been written by Grace, like the vocabulary, the writing style. It was way above her skill. It was written by somebody who had a higher skill level for writing, basically. In addition to that, you remember how Sarah's initial story was that her and Grace had gotten into a fight, which caused her to leave, and the fight was over Grace wanting to go to a friend's house. Well, they would ask Sarah, like, who was his friend? And Sarah wouldn't tell them. So they had to go track down all of Grace's friends and talk to everybody. And it turned out nobody had plans with her. Nobody was expecting her. Now, if that wasn't weird enough, police also talked to Grace's extended family, Sarah's family, and when they talked to them, they found that they had last seen Grace on the 4th of July, like for a 4th of July celebration, and that they hadn't seen her in months, and that they didn't even know that she was missing. Even though Sarah told police that she had contacted all the family trying to find out from everyone if they had heard from Grace, if they had seen Grace, because she was trying to find her. She was like, don't worry, I've spoken to everyone. When it turns out she didn't speak to anyone. No one even knew she was missing. She never told anyone. She never even posted about it on social media, which was like, no big deal. Maybe she wasn't a social media person, except that she was posting all the time about like everyday annoyances, headaches, things like that, but nothing about her missing child. Police also came to realize that in the time before and after Grace went missing, Sarah was getting Social Security for Grace and spent a shit ton of that money. And she had even updated the Social Security paperwork while Grace was missing and didn't mention that she was missing so it wouldn't affect the money coming in every month. And she even forged Grace's signature on these documents. And then in this paper, by the way, Sarah went on to assassinate Grace's character, which is just such a low blow after everything going on. But she said that Grace was a handful. Grace was argumentative. She was sexually inappropriate, manipulative, and a thief. Okay, but then, so moving on. Moving on from that because it's making me so fucking irritated. But it's December. It's December of 2016, and police come out with a press conference. And this is when they announce, 2 months later, well, like a month and a half later, that Grace isn't missing anymore. Her dismembered body has been found, and that Sarah is being looked at as a person of interest in this case. So they tell the public, like, we still need your help. We need you to come forward with anything you know, anything you may have seen. Did you see Sarah anywhere? Did you see Grace anywhere? Did you see them together? Let us know anything and everything that you know. Anyways, as I said, Sarah has been arrested. She's arrested at this point, and initially she's held on a $200,000 bail, but that ended up getting reduced to $10,000. So from $200,000 to $10,000, and that's because she wasn't being held on murder charges at this point. She was just being held on obstruction and endangering the welfare of a child. So because her bail was lowered so much, she was able to make bail. Her boyfriend Jacob posted bail, and she got out. From there, it took a year for an arrest to be made for the actual murder of Grace, but an arrest was made. In July of the following year, police arrested Sarah Packer in connection with the murder of her 14-year-old daughter, Grace Packer. And they arrested Sarah's boyfriend, Jacob Sullivan. So how this happened, how they came to be able to arrest both Sarah and Jacob, was actually pretty fortuitous, pretty serendipitous for the police, because Sarah and Jacob actually tried to take their own lives. Apparently what happened here is Jacob had been found unconscious in his home, and he was found by his girlfriend. And I'm not talking about Sarah. He had another girlfriend, and this was Catherine. Apparently Catherine, Jacob, and Sarah were all in a polyamorous relationship with each other. So she, Catherine, finds him passed out, ODing from pills in the home. She calls, the ambulance. He's taken to the He's taken in the ambulance to the hospital. And when the house was searched, they actually found a note that was written by Jacob. And in the note, he basically said that the police and the media were lying about him, lying about Sarah, making their lives super difficult, and they couldn't take it anymore, and said, like, don't believe anything that they say about us, don't believe it, it's not true. And this was addressed to his kids because he was a father. Okay, then Sarah was found, again, by Catherine, unconscious in the bathroom. She was rushed to the hospital as well, and she was found to have been, just like Jacob, ODing on pills. Can you imagine being Catherine? Okay, you find your boyfriend unconscious, ODing on pills. You get him off safely to the hospital. Then you find Sarah in the bathroom going through the same thing, have to get her off to the hospital. It sounds like a lot. It turns out that Sarah and Jacob had entered into a suicide pact together. Now, why would they do this? They did this because Sarah had been publicly named as a person of interest, a suspect in Grace's murder. And at this point, they were realizing that their gooses were effectively cooked, so they wanted to end it before they were going to be arrested. Now, they got all these pills, and I guess they got them from Catherine, and I don't know what she thought these pills were for. Like, she swears, and it's reported everywhere, she did not know this was going to happen. She didn't know they were going to try to take their own lives, and she didn't even know that they had killed Grace. She said that she was absolutely devastated and, like, shocked to learn that this was the case. Now, it was in the hospital that Jacob made a confession, and I don't know if he actually thought he was going to die or if the guilt got to him or what, but he told the hospital staff, like, I need to make a confession. And then he told them that he killed Grace. He told several people who worked at the hospital that he killed Grace. And then he made a detailed confession to the police about the rape, the torture, and the murder of 14-year-old Grace at the hands of Jacob and also her mother. He gave a detailed account of the 18 hours of horror that this little girl sustained. Jacob told them that Grace's murder was totally planned. He said that Sarah and he started planning Grace's murder in the fall of 2015, actually, and they were going to do this based on a shared fantasy that they had to rape and murder a child. And at the time that they were planning this, Grace actually wasn't even living with them anymore. Grace had left and she had been staying with family in North Carolina. She'd been there for months. She was staying with Sarah's ex-husband, David's sister, Katie. And apparently Grace had been there for months, and she was even enrolled in school, and she had been thriving there. She was happy and had a stable home life, and she was even being overseen by county social services, like a county social services agency there. But in less than a year, she was required to move back home to Pennsylvania to be with Sarah Packer. Now, initially, the plan was for Jacob and Sarah to kill Grace immediately upon her returning, but they actually waited months because she returned in November of 2015, and then she wasn't killed until July of 2016. And they did this. So basically what happened is they were living in that first house, the one that they were living in before Grace went missing. So they took Grace from this house to the house in Quakertown, and that's where all of this happened. That was the house that they ended up living in after Grace went missing, and I guess initially they were kind of going back and forth between both houses. They lived in both houses. So in the early morning hours of July 8th, 2016, Sarah and Jacob, who had the night before drugged Grace's pudding so that she would be all groggy, they loaded her into the car and made the drive to the home in Quakertown. This is in the morning, okay? And it turns out that Sarah had been drugging Grace for weeks prior to this murder to keep her groggy and keep her docile. It's so fucking sad. So Grace, 14 years old, is woken up in the morning and ushered out into a car, still in her pajamas, okay, all groggy, all sleepy from being drugged the night before, and is driven to this home in Quakertown. And as soon as she enters this home with these two monsters, Jacob starts hitting her over and over in the face. He hits her so much that he busts open her lip before forcing her to march up the stairs to the attic on the 3rd floor. When I picture this, it's just like, I can't. And this is happening in the morning. This little girl is just waking up. It's just so fucking sad. So she's taken upstairs to this attic room, and it's in this room that she is raped by Jacob Sullivan. A grown man, a huge man. You'll see photos. You've seen photos. A huge man who had taken Viagra to make sure that he was going to be able to do what he wanted to do. So little Grace is being assaulted by this man while her mother stands by and watches. And Grace cries out to her mom, is in pain, and is like begging for help. And her mother just stares at her and actually says to her, quote, "I can't help you. This is your life now." Jacob said that Sarah wanted Grace to see that she was actively standing by and not helping her. He said that both he and Sarah got off on this. Then, once he was done doing what he was doing to Grace, an experience that he said wasn't enjoyable for either of them, Grace sat there, terrified, in pain, crying, hysterical, scared, and Jacob sat there and tried to console the girl after what he did to her. He told police that he didn't want what happened to Grace to be a, quote, terror show. He wanted her to have fun. He said it wasn't meant to be mean, that obviously it was mean, but it wasn't meant to be mean, that he just had these fantasies, that he was a, quote, closeted rapist, and that he loved watching violent porn, and that he just wanted to act it out himself. It was at this point that Sarah left the home. She left Jacob and Grace alone so that she could go to the store and get more medicine to drug Grace. She got Tylenol PM and some other medication, and when she got back, she told Grace, like, take this, it's going to help with the pain that you're feeling after being raped by a grown man. This is just so upsetting to me. It makes me, like, physically ill. Like, how you could do this to anyone, let alone your own child, makes no sense to me. But Jacob said that they chose Grace specifically because Sarah hated Grace. She hated her. And she said Grace was rebellious, and this was her way of finally having control over this little girl. So Grace took this medication, and the first dose they gave her, I guess they gave her too much, obviously, and it made her sick, so she vomited it. So then they forced her to take more. They forced her to take too much again, and then they bound her, they gagged her with a pink ball gag, and they stuffed her in a hot cedar closet in July to die. Sarah and Jacob then left. They drove their car back to their home in Abington and waited hours until about 3 a.m. before they drove back to the home in Quakertown so they could figure out what they were going to do with Grace's body. When they got back to the house, they found that Grace was still alive. She had clearly been through hell because of, all the drugs that had been in her system, the assault that she had went through, the fact that she was left in this hot closet in July. But she did what she could to save herself. She got the ball gag out of her mouth. She had even gotten some of her bindings loose, but it hadn't been enough. And when I think about this, that their plan was to leave her to die in the heat from like a drug overdose. It's so fucking evil. In response to finding her alive, Jacob crawled on the floor behind her and put her in a chokehold and started strangling her to death. And he strangled her as she fought and she clawed at him, wanting to live. And the whole time he just kept telling her, like, it's okay, honey, just let go. It's time to let go. It's okay to let go. And as Grace looked up at her mother, Sarah repeated the same sentiment, like, it's okay to go, honey, you can go. And so Sarah stood by and watched Jacob strangle Grace to death. And Jacob said, like he told investigators, that it took way longer than he expected it would. Like, it was harder than he thought it would be physically to strangle a little girl to death. And when he said this, he chuckled. There were a couple of things that he chuckled about when he was confessing, like this, and the fact that Sarah stood by and watched the assault and said, like, this was your life now. He chuckled about that too. He is a monster. And don't get me wrong, Sarah is a fucking monster too, because while this happened, while Grace was being choked and they were both telling her it was okay, Sarah held her hand, stroked her hand, and was like, it's okay to go. It's okay to go. And she too said that it felt like forever, but it was probably just a couple of minutes. And later she was asked at trial, like, how do you think this felt for Grace? How long do you think it felt for Grace? And Sarah was just like, it probably felt like forever. Sarah and Jacob then took Grace's body and they put her inside this cardboard box that also contained some of Jacob's comic books, and then they covered her in cat litter, hoping that this would help with the smell. This was Sarah's idea. And then they put that box in their attic where it stayed until October, and 3 days later, they reported Grace missing. Months her body was in that hot attic, dude. And the only reason they ended up moving her and disposing of her the way that they did is because that October, police had come to the home. They had figured out where they were. They came to the home and they said that they needed Grace's medical records. And once police came and left, the two were like, okay, we need to do something. They're probably getting on to us. They're definitely getting too close. We need to do something and get her out of here. And they were right in thinking that police were getting close, because when they entered the home, they noticed that there was nothing there for Grace. There were no photos of her on the walls. There wasn't even a room set up for her if she was to come back. So anyways, thinking that police were onto them, they decided that they needed to get rid of Grace's body. So they took her out of that box. They put her in the bathtub and they proceeded to dismember her, with Jacobs describing this experience to being similar to carving a turkey. They dismembered her with a bow saw that Sarah had bought 2 weeks prior, saying that she was buying this with the dual purpose of cutting firewood and dismembering her child. And they were able to find a receipt for this bow saw, and in finding this receipt, they were able to go to the store, see the surveillance footage, and they saw Sarah there buying the saw along with 2 additional blades from a Tractor Supply store. After dismembering Grace, they then took her remains and put them into plastic totes and then put them in the back of Jacob's car before getting in the car and just driving aimlessly. They didn't know what they were going to do with her, but they drove and drove until they found a place that they thought was sufficient, and then they discarded her on the side of the road like a piece of trash. After killing, dismembering, and discarding Grace's body, the two then decided they were just going to try to go about life as normal as possible. They weren't going to talk about it. They weren't going to Google anything about the murder, the disappearance, anything like that to, keep their internet history clear. And they went on this way until police started sniffing around. They realized that they were being caught. They tried to take their own lives, and now they were getting a confession. Now, after telling police this, Jacob, he had the nerve to ask police. He was like, listen, sorry, I'm thirsty, one second. He had the nerve to ask police to please keep him out of general population because he didn't want to be assaulted by prisoners. He said he would rather die than have what happened to Grace happen to him. The nerve. Holy shit, the nerve on this man. Oh my, I do not. After Grace's body was recovered, a memorial was held in her honor that was called, quote, Abington Loves Grace. A woman named Andrea was the one who arranged the memorial service, and she didn't know Grace, but she had a son who was about the same age, and she said that she just felt compelled to do something. She didn't want Grace's murder to be the end of her story. A GoFundMe page was set up, and they received so many donations, more than they needed, so the excess funds were used for a scholarship in Grace's name for a child with special needs, because Grace herself had special needs, and she was always the type to have a heart for other kids with special needs. And as for the memorial, it took place that January, the January after she was discovered, and hundreds of people came to support Grace and say their goodbyes. There were photos of Grace and flowers, and the reverend who presided over the funeral did not hide what happened to her. The reverend said that it was tragic, but it couldn't be swept under the rug. It needed to be in your face. You needed to see that these types of things happened so the community could band together and be stronger to protect their most vulnerable. Friends came and told stories about Grace, things that made her happy, things that she was excited for, and then at the end of the service, they released pink and purple balloons into the sky because these were Grace's favorite colors. During her funeral, it was announced that the community was trying to raise money with the hopes to open a foundation that helps foster children called On Gracie's Wings. They do luncheons and paint nights and toy drives and get school supplies and presents at Christmas, and their purpose is to help children in foster care, among other groups, have a safe transition to a better life. And this still exists. I went to their Facebook page. They're still doing stuff. They're still doing the damn thing. On Gracie's Wings, in her name, in her honor. Anyways, investigation, trial. Jacob was arrested, and as I'm sure you can imagine, he was charged with all kinds of shit. He was charged with rape. He was charged with murder. He was charged with abuse of a corpse, etc., etc. And when he was brought into the courtroom, he apologized for his actions. So in case you were wondering or worried, or wondering worriedly, 3 hours after Jacob was arrested, Sarah was also arrested. I think I mentioned that, but I cannot remember. She was arrested. So remember, she was arrested for, impeding on an investigation, then she was released on bail. Well, now she's rearrested with new charges. She was facing charges related to Grace's murder, and she was also facing charges for defrauding the government, because you remember she's still getting Grace's checks and lying about Grace so that she can get money after she's murdered this little girl. Which I'm like, good. All the charges on both of these assholes, and neither of them were given bail. Jacob was strangely supportive of Sarah. He was like, I don't know why they're coming down so hard on her. She didn't kill Grace. I did. Plus, Grace was an absolute nightmare. This is what he said. And something else that he said that was so frustrating is like, at some point, because they didn't like Grace, because they hated Grace, they considered letting Grace go, returning her to sender or whatever. And the reason they didn't do this is because they wanted to keep getting the money for her. After the two were arrested, like, people were pissed, dude. People were so pissed. A change.org petition was created, and it was signed by like 500 people, with all of them signing it, saying that they wanted both Jacob and Sarah to be punished to the highest extent of the law. They were coming for their throats. Now, once it came out that Grace had been murdered, her biological mother, Rose, was devastated, dude, because though she hadn't seen her in years, she hadn't seen her kids in years, she lost her parental rights, she had assumed that the system had put her kids into a safe and loving home. She said she had lots of regrets, and she so wished she could go back and fix so many things so her children had stayed with her and Grace would still be alive today. She said that she's very upset she couldn't protect her children, couldn't save Grace. She said, like, Grace was alone. She was killed alone and took her last breath alone. She said she just cannot imagine what her child went through. Being beaten, being raped, being stuffed in a closet, to die alone in the heat. She can't imagine what Grace felt like, and that is incredibly just hard for her. She said that one day she had come home, like, how she found out about this is one day she came home and there was just like a card from a detective on her door that just said, like, call me about a runaway. And she didn't at all think that this was Grace. She actually thought it was her oldest daughter, because at this time she would have been almost 18. So she thought that her oldest daughter had like ran away from her adopted family looking for her bio family, because like she was an adult now and she could look it up. But then she found out it was Grace and she was just like, what the fuck, like shocked. And then shortly after that, she found out Grace was gone, and she said she just like crumbled apart and fell to the floor. She said she just always felt in her heart that she would see her daughter again one day, and now she was never going to get to. And she'll never see her again because of Sarah, because of a woman that she thought her child would be safe with, because of somebody who was supposed to take care of her, somebody who worked in the foster system, somebody who's supposed to be a good match, but somebody who instead completely planned to murder this child. And oh my God, it's so creepy. But this girl, a foster daughter who had lived with Sarah for a bit, came out and told a story after, and oh my God. So she told a couple of things. First, she said, like, one of the first things she said, and this is so creepy, is she said that, like, while she was living with Sarah, like in the foster situation, she and Sarah had been watching like an episode of CSI or something along the lines, some true crime show. And while watching it, Sarah had like looked at her and been like, man, if I was going to kill somebody, I would dismember the body and set it on fire so that they could never recover it. Which obviously Grace wasn't set on fire, but when you hear this, it's so creepy considering what did happen. And another thing this girl said, which is just like, it gives me the chills. She said that while she was staying with Sarah, she herself, the foster daughter, actually became pregnant. And she said that once Sarah found out she was pregnant, she was like really going hard trying to convince this girl to give this baby up for adoption so that Sarah could adopt the baby. And she said initially she agreed, like, okay, I will do this. But something inside of her was like, you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do this. As some might say, her lizard brain was a tingling. So she was like, I'm not going to. I feel like if I do this, I'm going to regret it. And now that she knows what happens, she's like, holy fuck, I'm so glad I didn't do that. So back in jail, Sarah is on suicide watch, saying that she is devastated. She is devastated at the allegations made against her. And her attorney spoke out on her behalf and was like, this is all BS. Like, Jacob, I don't know why he's saying this. First, in his suicide note, he says that, like, they had nothing to do with this. Now, all of a sudden, he's going to confess to all these things that he didn't do and she didn't do. It all sounds a little suspicious. Her attorneys also claimed that they were going to have her evaluated for mental health issues, so they were trying to figure out some way to get her off on these charges, which, you know, is their job. Now, the prosecution was considering going after the death penalty in this case because they believed that there were aggravating factors that would warrant such a punishment, like the fact that Grace had been kidnapped and tortured in the commission of this murder. So after some deliberation, they thought about it. They, weighed their options, whatever prosecutors do be doing, and they decided that yes, they would be going after the death penalty for both Sarah and Jacob. Now, while the murder case was pending, Grace's biological parents actually tried to have themselves made the executors of Grace's estate so that they could sue the social services agencies that failed their daughter. Grace's adopted grandparents, who were David's parents, like countered this and were like, it seems weird that all of a sudden Grace's biological parents want to be involved. Like, what are your motives? Why do you want to be involved? And then Rose and Rodney countered, being like, you guys knew about the abuse, you let it go on, you should not be, well, they're fighting, they're going back and forth. And then the grandparents are like, well, maybe we knew, but anytime we saw any abuse, we told them to stop it, which means they did know things were happening, and that's super fucked. In the end, neither Grace's parents nor her grandparents were made an executor of the state, and instead, like, a court-appointed administrator, like somebody who was totally neutral, was put in charge. There was a lawsuit, though, by this, the lawsuit did happen, and it was against, quote, 3 defendants that provided foster, adoption, and behavioral health services to Grace throughout her life, end quote. And the estate of Grace Packer ended up getting a settlement of $8.9 million. But I have no idea who this money, went to. Anyways, back to these 2 dickheads. The prosecution was not having it. They were like, Grace was a disposable child to these 2, and we, the prosecution, the court, will be her voice since she no longer has one because they took it. And they initially wanted to try them together. That was their whole plan, is to have one trial for both of them. But ultimately they ended up having separate trials. That's the word I'm looking for. And the trials began in 2019. Now, for Jacob. His attorney tried to have his confession thrown out, but thankfully that was unsuccessful. So they were like, okay, here's what we're going to do instead. We're going to try to blame the entire thing on Sarah. So everyone was buckling in for a lengthy trial because this man who had confessed to the rape, confessed to the murder, was now going to try to blame it all on Sarah, and it was going to be a whole thing. But then, Shyamalan twist, Jacob surprised everybody by actually just pleading guilty. I guess when he first went to do this, the legalities of it and such really stressed him out. His blood pressure spiked super high and he had to be rushed to the hospital. I guess he was supposed to take medication for anxiety and high blood pressure every day, and Angela didn't give it to him, which caused the medical episode. Either way, after his medical episode, he came back, he pled guilty. And it's believed that this was done in part because it didn't seem like it was going to be super successful for him to try to blame the whole thing on Sarah and say he was manipulated by Sarah, because a psychiatrist or a psychologist, one of them brain doctors, testified that Jacob was actually very intelligent, too smart to be manipulated by Sarah. I guess he had an IQ that was high enough to put him at superior intelligence. He was fucking smart. He's obviously stupid, but he was intelligent enough that it would be hard for the jury to buy that he was manipulated by Sarah. And with that said, Sarah was also said to be very smart, of superior intelligence. She had a degree in psychology and an IQ of over 140. Anyways, he pleads guilty and a jury is brought in from Philly to determine what his sentencing is going to be, because even though he's pled guilty, he's now still, he didn't make a plea deal. He's still able to either get life in prison without parole or the death penalty. And the prosecution was like, he should absolutely get the death penalty for his unspeakable, heinous crimes. The prosecutor said this was the worst crime they had seen in all the years they'd been a prosecutor. The prosecutor added that Jacob and Sarah had decided together that Grace was, quote, not worth the air she breathed, and that Jacob had made Grace's last moments on earth a living hell. Now, during this hearing, before going into the details of what actually happened to Grace, the prosecutor looked at the jury and they're like, okay, this is what I need you to do. And the jury's like, we're listening. And the prosecutor was like, I need you to picture the absolute worst thing you could ever imagine happening to a child. You got that in your head? Good. You need that in your mind, because that's what we're about to talk about. That's what this dickhead did to Grace. And then they were shown everything. They heard his confession. They heard everything he said happened. They were shown photos of Grace's body in that condition and photos of the closet where she had been held and some of her bindings. It was so bad. Everything that this jury saw, this crime, was so bad that the judge urged the jury to seek mental health services and counseling after going through this trial. Now, Jacob's attorneys did the best they could to get him a lighter punishment, not give him the death penalty. They were still going with the method of blaming it on Sarah. They said that Sarah had a history of sexually abusing children with her prior partner, her husband David, and said that Sarah was the driving force. Sarah planned it. It was all her fault. The defense basically said that Jacob should be given the same sentence that Sarah was being given for fairness and all that. And basically he was saying that Jacob should get a lighter sentence because Sarah had actually entered into a plea deal, which we're going to get into. But in her plea deal, by the way, she had to testify at Jacob's sentencing hearing, and she had to admit everything she had done. This woman was evil. She smirked. She smirked at times while telling the court the whole story. She told the court how she stood by and she watched Jacob rape Grace. She said that Grace was difficult, she hated her, and she wanted her dead. She admitted to helping kill Grace, helping bind her, even said that she was the one who put the ball gag in her mouth. She even admitted to the court that during the rape she told Grace, like, I can't help you, this is your life now. And she said she didn't want to help Grace. She said specifically of this, quote, Grace had become, for lack of a better word, a non-entity. She just didn't exist anymore. I wanted her to go away. Despite telling the court all of this, she did say that this whole rape fantasy wasn't her fantasy. It was something that just Jacob had, and that she just went along with it because she didn't think that she could tell him no without losing him. She actually told the court that the initial plan wasn't to murder Grace at all. They were going to keep her. They were going to keep her up in the attic as a sex slave so that Jacob could use her whenever he wanted. But when he changed his mind and decided to kill her, she just went along with it. During this hearing, Grace's little brother spoke. Her biological little brother, who was also adopted by the Packers. He was 14 at this time, and I can only imagine how horrible this was for him. He said that the only way that he could cope with the loss of his sister, with the murder of his sister, is for people to learn her story, to hear her story, and do what they could to help kids in the future. He said that if Grace knew that her story was going to help other kids, if what happened to her was going to help other children, she would have given her life for that. And he said his sister was a hero. And then he ended his statement with saying, quote, watch out for all the kids so that a loss like Grace's loss never happens again. Do your best to help kids who can't help themselves. Before closing out the hearing, the prosecutor stood in silence for 2 minutes, the amount of time it was believed it took for Grace to be strangled to death. All the while, photos of Grace were projected. Different photos of her were being shown during this moment of silence, and the prosecutor just stared into Jacob's face. The prosecution then asked the jury to give Jacob Sullivan the death penalty, reminding them that Grace's life ended in a house of horrors that became a hell on earth. The defense asked that Jacob's life be spared. They said that he should be given leniency because, after all, he did confess. He did tell them what happened so that they knew the full story. Nobody had to wonder. But the prosecution made a good point in saying that sometimes these dicks who do these horrible things like to tell the stories. They like reliving what they did. So those confessions could have just been for him. The defense also tried to say, it wasn't Jacob. Jacob wasn't the mastermind. Sarah was the mastermind, and she manipulated and controlled Jacob. But Jacob's own words undid this, because Jacob said that Sarah liked him to be in control of the relationship. Those were his words. Plus, the prosecution was like, listen, jury, Mr. or Mrs. Jury member, question for you. Could anyone dominate and manipulate you into doing what Jacob Sullivan did to Grace Packer? I'm going to think that's a no. That's going to be a no from me, dog. And if that wasn't enough to seal his fate, which I think it probably was, there was more. The nurse, one of the nurses who took care of Jacob after he tried to take his own life, she testified at this hearing, and she told the court that Jacob told her Grace was the worst thing that ever happened to him and his family, that he killed her, and he liked it. Now, in order for Jacob to get the death penalty, it had to be a unanimous decision. We've talked about this in other cases before, but even if there is just one holdout on the jury, it would automatically be life in prison, not the death penalty. It actually took days for the jury to come back with a decision, and at one point they even came out and they were like, listen, we cannot come to a unanimous decision. And the judge told them to go back and keep deliberating, which actually was kind of a controversial take because Jacob's attorney said that this sent the message to the jury that a life sentence was, quote, unacceptable. And let me know what you think about this down below, because I see what his attorney is saying, to be honest. Like, it's a good argument, but emotionally speaking, I don't care. But that is emotionally speaking, not logically speaking, because everybody, we know fair trials and all that. But I'm curious what you think. Let me know what you think about that argument down below. In the end, though, the jury did come back with a unanimous decision. They had sentenced Jacob Sullivan to death for the murder of Grace Packer. And when he heard his fate, he showed no emotion. And when asked if he'd like to make a statement, he simply said, "No, thank you." In addition to the death sentence, the judge added an additional and consecutive life sentence plus 44 to 88 years in prison for his other crimes. But those sentences will only become relevant if Jacob was able to successfully appeal his death sentence, which would be automatic because an appeal automatically goes into effect in Pennsylvania when somebody is given a death sentence. So if he was able to successfully appeal, then he'd have to, serve that other sentence. So he was pretty much fucked for life. Now this judge did not like Jacob. It was clear this judge was Judge Gibbons, and they actually sort of taunted Jacob for asking the cops to not put him in Gen Pop. You remember when he was like, "Please don't do that. I don't want what happened to Grace to happen to me." The judge kind of taunted him about this. The judge said to Jacob, quote, "Like the little baby you are, you asked them to protect you because you're scared to have done to you what you did to this child." When handing down the sentence, the judge said, quote, "Jacob, you have no soul." And then they added, quote, "I have never said that to another human being in my life, and I hope to not say it again, though I expect to say something similar to Sarah Packer." The following day, Sarah Packer was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. The judge told her that she was an utter and miserable failure at being a human being, and then added, quote, "Evil attracts evil. Evil recognizes evil." The judge also told Sarah, good luck, because you're going to prison with a lot of women, and a lot of those women are mothers. And guess where their kids are? Foster care. And they're all sitting there praying that their kids don't end up with somebody like you. And man, she was evil. Sarah Packer is evil. Definitely as evil as Jacob Sullivan, maybe even more so. But the reason that she was given a plea deal is because the physical evidence against her was a lot weaker. Jacob admitted he's the one that raped her. Jacob admitted he's the one that killed her. And the evidence that they had against her wouldn't have really qualified for the death penalty anyway. Now, when the prosecutor read victim impact statements at Sarah's trial, her sentencing hearing, they noticed that Sarah wouldn't even look at them. She seemed disinterested in the whole thing. So the prosecutor looked at the judge and was like, "Can you make her look at me when I'm reading these statements? Because she took Grace's voice and I'm going to be that for her and she needs to fucking listen." They also said, the prosecutor said that they had trouble understanding how a mother could do this to their own child, to their own daughter. But they realized in going through this case that Sarah Packer was never a mother to Grace. She was never a parent. She didn't want to be a parent to her. And that the word mother out of Sarah Packer's mouth was a profanity. It's just so sad because it felt like in looking through this that nobody loved Grace and nobody cared for Grace. But when I got to the victim impact statements and things like that, it seems that people did. People in her family came forward and talked about her, showed photos of her during happier times, like her eating a piece of birthday cake or playing in the pool or sitting smiling in her uncle's big rig. Now, as I said, Jacob got an automatic appeal. And when they appealed for him, when his attorneys did the appeal, basically their argument was that the judge had. That when the judge had, the jury continued deliberating. It put, the idea that a life sentence wasn't sufficient, blah, blah, blah. That was their argument, but the appeal was rejected. It didn't actually end up mattering, though, because on April 30th, 2020, after less than a year of him being in prison, Jacob Sullivan actually died in prison of cardiac-related issues. Basically, he had an aortic aneurysm, and upon learning that he died this way, actually Googled, quote, "Does it hurt to die of an aortic aneurysm?" Maybe I'm a fucking asshole. I don't know. But this is what it said. I'm going to read this quote. "If your aortic aneurysm ruptures, you will feel a sudden and severe pain in the middle or side of your abdomen." Okay. In men, the pain can also radiate down into the scrotum. So that's what he died of, alone in prison at the age of, I think, 47, which, good. Because honestly, if anyone deserves to have their chest rupture and their dick get zapped off, it's this guy. And I know, I'm not a doctor, and that's not really what happened to him, but it's what I like to imagine. Blow up this guy's heart and zap off his dick. He sucks. And, you know, I guess they were going to kill him anyways, but it would have been nice if he could have suffered in prison like a little bit longer, because he probably would have actually. He probably would have had to suffer in prison for a while, because there was a moratorium, I believe there still is, on executions in the state, so it would have been a long time of him being in jail. And the prosecution basically said with him dying this way, at least, like, they don't have to deal with several appeals forever. So there's that. Now, if you're like me, you're probably horrified to think about the fact that this woman was a foster parent. She worked with kids all her life. She fostered a number of kids that she didn't go on to adopt. We know that her ex-husband David was a creep supreme, and now her boyfriend Jacob is a fucking monster. And the one thing that is the same, what's the word? The one thing that's the same? There's a word for this. It's Sarah Packer, a predator herself. She's the one thing that all of this has in common. Common theme. That's what I was looking for. After Sarah was arrested, convicted, all that jazz, an investigation was conducted into whether or not there had been any other abuse of any other children in Sarah's care. Why this didn't happen after her first husband was arrested for raping children in her care is a good fucking question, which I don't have the answer to. In looking into this, they found that Sarah had been a foster mother to about 30 kids. 30. She had said that she found being a foster mother very rewarding. She wanted to work with kids so that she could take part in influencing their lives. She said that, like, wherever her career took her, all she cared about was that she was put into a position where she could benefit other people, which is just fucking laughable now, right? But from what I've seen, the official findings of this report haven't been released, or at least they haven't been made public. But some kids that were in their care during the years that they were fostering, during the years that she and David were fostering, have come out and spoke, so we have some information. So some of these kids that came forward and spoke were in the home at the same time Grace was there, so they have some accounts of how she was treated. And as I'm sure you can imagine, there were a lot of red flags the entire time, and Grace was abused pretty much the entire time she was in Sarah's care. These kids noted that there was a huge difference between how Grace was treated and how her brother was treated. They seemed to love the boy, but Grace, no. She was treated so shitty. She was emotionally abused. They would get mad at her and tell her to, quote, be normal. She was physically abused by both David and Sarah. And one kid even saw them beating her with this big orange strap, and they would lock her up in the basement or lock her in her bedroom and not let her leave. They said that Sarah was mean to Grace. Grace was just different. Her brain worked different. Her body worked differently, and this was upsetting to Sarah because she didn't like to have to deal with it. Sometimes she'd have to show Grace how to do something more than once or tell her to do something more than once, and this would piss Sarah off. She would yell at her and hit her even though it wasn't her fault, and Grace was just never happy at home. She'd be smiling all day, but as soon as she entered that house, the smile would be gone. And it just breaks my heart because I truly believe all Grace wanted was to be loved, and she never got that. She never got to experience that. And it's what all kids want, and it's what she deserved, and she never got it. And friends came out and told, their story and said that Grace would tell them that she thought her adopted mother didn't like her and definitely didn't love her. And that's just what we know about. That is just what we've been told by people who were there. But I can't imagine it got much better once she was done fostering and she was left alone with just Grace and her brother. I can't imagine the abuse she went through. I did read some reports that said in the days leading up to the murders, she was raped at least 2 times by Jacob. And it just seems like so many people knew, but nobody did anything. The kids said they reported it. They reported this abuse happening, but that was it. They reported it and nothing happened. Sarah stayed in her job and kept fostering kids. And even Grace herself had told people at school that she was being abused. Nothing happened. Kids said that she would show up hungry. She was hungry. Nothing happened. And this lady who I believe was from church that went to church with Sarah said she knew Sarah had told her that she had given Grace sleeping pills to knock her out and keep her docile. But nobody did anything. Now, changes were made after Grace's death as a result of numerous failures, which always happens. It takes a kid dying for people to fucking do something. And they noted that there are many times Grace could have been saved. Social services workers need increased vetting, and all children's services agencies in the state need to talk to each other and allow police access to information when they ask for it, which seems like duh. You would think that this would just be done, but we see that it's not all the time. And it took forever for any steps to actually be taken. I saw an article that came out 5 years after the murders that said a lot of promises have been made, but nobody's done something. Nobody's done anything, and it's very disappointing. By 2021, though, they finally had done something. They unveiled the child welfare reform legislation in memory of Grace Packer called, quote, Grace's Law, and it included 3 bills. It's very wordy. You can look it up, but the gist is that they would require the implementation of the statewide child welfare case management system, which was mandated in 2014, but wasn't being used, which is a shame because, like, what is the point of mandating something that's not going to be used? But sure. They also changed the requirement to keep records from 10 to 30 years and eliminate the provision providing the expunction for a perpetrator who was a minor at the time of the alleged abuse upon that individual. And they made it so that there had to be a definition for a, quote, valid report in the Pennsylvania Child Protective Services Law. Which, okay, that's something. It doesn't really sound like enough to me, though. Like, that's just my opinion. It sounds like they could do more. I don't know what. I don't know how to fix this problem. This is why it is a problem. But it's just a fucking shame because Grace was... she was in constant danger her whole life. And so many people could have done something and they didn't. And that is disheartening. You remember I told you I read that report and it was like heavily redacted. Well, in that report, you could see that she was in communication with governmental agencies over and over and over throughout her entire life. She was constantly being monitored, but somehow nobody caught this. Nobody did anything to help her, so it continued. It's just like Judge Gibbons said while she was sentencing Grace's murderers. The judge said, quote, "So ends the story of Grace Packer. We all let her down." And with that, my friends, is the story of the tragic murder of Grace Packer. I hope you found this to be informative, and I hope my presentation of it made sense. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering Grace with me today. So now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of Michelle Blair, a monster mother and her house of horrors. And I want to start this video off, as I sometimes do, with a quote. I'm actually going to start it off with 2 quotes. The first one is going to be from the judge who eventually ended up sentencing Michelle. She said of Michelle's heinous crimes, and I'm warning you now, this one's really messed up, so just know that going into it. But she said of Michelle's crimes, and I quote, "One thing that strikes me as the greatest tragedy here is that they will never know what a life is like without experiencing fearing their mother. They will never know the joy of what could have been in their life without having you in it. They lived in terrible fear of you, and I find that just so sad in this case. After all is said and done, you impose the death penalty on your own children." And now a quote from the woman herself, from Michelle Blair. And this is Michelle referencing her 13-year-old daughter, Stony. Okay? She said of her 13-year-old child, and I quote, "I definitely meant to kill her. If I had a chance to do it again, I would." On March 24th, 2015, on the east side of Detroit, townhouse number 804 at the Martin Luther King Apartments was served with an eviction notice. The renter, who had been living in the low-income townhouse for at least 10 years, had been really struggling on paying rent. She couldn't seem to hold down a job, and she had tried to get help from family members, but they had kind of gotten to the point where they were like, "We need to stop enabling you," and told her, like, "No, I can't help you financially anymore. You need to get a job. You need to go back to school. You need to get it together, guy." But she didn't. And at this point, she was behind over $2,000 in her rent. She had dropped out of high school in the 10th grade when she got pregnant with her first child, a daughter. And because of her limited education, she found that jobs were a little bit harder to come by. She had worked in a bar for a short period of time, but that didn't really work. So she ended up just being a stay-at-home mom, which is a hard job in itself, don't get me wrong. But she didn't have really any income coming in except for $700 a month that she was getting in governmental assistance for her 4 children. So when representatives came over to her apartment to perform the eviction and they knocked on the door, she didn't answer. Michelle and none of her children were home at that time, so they let themselves in because that's how evictions work. You go in and you just move the people out. Like, I don't know how eviction processes work in other states, but in California, you get a lot of notice before this happens. But either way, they go in and they find a completely trashed apartment. Apparently there was garbage, food, stuff everywhere. It was described as unlivable. So they were inside the apartment and they started moving stuff around, and this is when they came upon a deep freeze. You know, the type that is like a big square and it opens from the top and it's like really deep? A deep freeze? Okay, so they find this, and normally that wouldn't be strange, but they found it in the living room, and that is a bit odd. But it wasn't as odd as things were going to get. Odd really isn't the right word. The right word is fucked, honestly. It was about 11:30 in the morning. Like, it wasn't even noon yet when this is happening. And they go to move this deep freeze. And when they go to move it, they realize, like, this is way too heavy for us to actually lift and move it. So they decide they're going to open it and empty out what's inside so that they can then move it all out in pieces. And that's when they made the most horrible discovery that I think anybody could ever make. They open the freezer, and inside they find the body of a young teenage girl. She had a piece of black fabric wrapped around her neck, and she was completely like frozen, like to the freezer. She'd clearly been in there a while. And she was so unrecognizable that they actually thought they were looking at the body of like a 45 or 50-year-old woman and not a child, which it did turn out to be a child. So naturally police were called, and when police came and they started processing the scene, they started looking around, they made another just horrible discovery, as if what I'm telling you right now hasn't been horrible enough. As they're trying to like look inside the freezer further, kind of move the girl, which they had a lot of trouble with, but as they're looking in the freezer further, they find that she's not alone in there. They find that below her, she's on top of another body, and the body below her is that of a young boy wrapped in a blanket. Now, while this is happening, one of the neighbors had, taken notice to what's going on, because, nosy neighbors. And they let police know that the occupant of the home, a 35-year-old mother of 4 named Michelle Blair, is actually just like right next door at a neighbor's house. I believe this neighbor was one of Michelle's relatives, and it's reported that at the time that this happened, Michelle was babysitting someone else's kids, which is just like, I can't even imagine. But when police go, they do find that Michelle is there, and she's there with 2 of her children, but there are 2 of her children missing. This is 9-year-old Stephen and 13-year-old Stony that are not with Michelle. So police go to Michelle and they start talking to her, and initially they're just talking to her as like a person of interest, but it didn't take long of them questioning her for them to realize, like, damn, shit's really fucked up here. So they, take her downtown, as they say. And as police are leading her away, she just simply says to one of her neighbors, "I'm sorry." Later that day, many neighbors gathered in like a common area, grassy space to speak about their frustrations with the tragedy. Because even though the kids hadn't been identified yet, it is still fucking kids found in a freezer. That's an upsetting thing. And one of the women who was there, a woman in her 50s named Yvette, said of this tragedy, and I quote, "We lost 2 of our beautiful children down here in the Martin Luther King apartments because we don't want to pay attention or be nosy. This is a message I have for other communities. Be nosy, pay attention, they're children." To which I say, yes. So naturally, police believe that the bodies in the freezer are that of Michelle's 2 unaccounted for children, because honestly, who else could it be? What are the odds that it's any other kids, right? But they have to confirm this. So they take the kids to the morgue. Well, not even just the kids. They take the entire freezer, the entire deep freeze, to the morgue, because the kids are frozen to the freezer. So they have to wait for them to like thaw a bit so that they can take them out. And they do that, and it takes 3 whole days for the bodies to be thawed out enough for autopsies to be performed. 3 days before their identities could be confirmed. But once the autopsies were conducted, it was determined and the kids were positively identified as 9-year-old Stephen Gage Berry and 13-year-old Stony Ann Blair. And though the exact time of death could not be determined, it appeared that the 2 had been in the freezer at least a couple of years. And the county medical examiner said that the children had died from, quote, multiple blunt force trauma, but that Stephen also had thermal injuries listed as a cause of death. And I can only imagine that that might mean that he was still alive when he was put in the freezer, which is just like too much to think about. But actually, now that I'm thinking about his injuries, which we are going to get into, that could have been from something else as well. But again, we're going to get into that a little bit later. A neighbor named Tori said of the murders and of the children, and I quote, "This is so tragic. They were the nicest kids, so respectable." And another kid, a neighbor who was 10 years old, I believe, and his name was Eli, he was friends with Stephen. And when he learned what had happened to his friend, another actual child, he was shocked. Like, how could he not be? How could a 10-year-old not be shocked to learn that one of their friends had been killed, right? He says that he was told that Stephen had gone to Georgia to like live with family, and that Stephen's mother, Michelle, was such a nice lady and gave him a hug every day. Others said that Michelle was a fine woman, a kind woman, one woman calling her a beautiful spirit. She gave the impression that Michelle was just trying to be a good person and get by with her kids. And Michelle's brother Marlon, who lived in California at the time of the murders, at the time that he gave this quote, he said he was still just processing the news, and he said specifically, and I quote, "It's too early to even say what this could be or make any judgments. She didn't have any emotional problems from what I'm aware of. I don't know what to say about all this." She didn't have any emotional problems that he's aware of. Let's remember that going forward. So now when Michelle was taken downtown and she was questioned, interrogated, the entire thing was recorded, and that's the video that I watched on YouTube that Christy sent me. And what she says and the way she says it is just so crazy. Considering what she's there talking about, you would think that she cared more, but she really only seemed to be concerned about talking to her aunt and getting a message to her aunt to let her aunt know that she still loved her and that she wasn't mad at her. And I just found that to be a really odd point because she seemed to care about that more than anything else she was discussing. She was asked by the investigator how many kids she has, and she said 2, that she used to have 4. And that note really stuck with me because it just seemed so incredibly heartless. And then she just started casually confessing. She had no problem saying everything that she did. And she started with telling the investigator what happened to 9-year-old Stephen, because apparently he was killed first. So this is the point where I want to let you know that things are going to take a hard, sharp turn into really fucked up territory. This is a really, really rough case, so just know that going into it. So Michelle tells the investigator that in August of 2012, and keep in mind the kids weren't found until 2015, okay? So in August of 2012, she came home to find her youngest child, who was 8 years old at the time that she was arrested, so he must have been like 5 or 6 in 2012. She says that she came home to find him simulating sexual activities with his dolls. So immediately when she sees her young son doing this, she freaks out, as anybody would. And she's like, who did this? Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that with your dolls? Who showed you this? Has anyone ever done this to you? And she says that her young son responded with, yes, my brother Stephen has. Now, Michelle says that the first thing that she does in this scenario, well, she says 2 different things. First, she says she immediately confronts Stephen, but then when she's in court, she says that she actually called police right away once she was told this by her youngest son. And that she asked the police, she called the police and asked, like, what would happen in the scenario where one brother was raping his little brother? Like, what would happen when they take both kids out of the house? What would be the situation? And she says that police told her that, yes, both boys would likely be taken out of the house, and that they asked her, like, is this happening in your home? And she said, no, she was calling for a friend, which, that's a whole nother thing. Like, the police should have definitely, if this call happened, the police definitely should have done something at that point, that time, right then and there. But apparently she says that police just told her to call CPS to get more information, but that, yes, an investigation would have to be done into the household, and during the investigation, both boys would be taken out of the house. She says at this point she goes to confront him, and he denies it. So at that point, she just started beating him, that she punched him over and over and over, that she tortured him, right? She tortured him until finally he admitted to it. He admitted to hurting his brother. He admitted to the sexual assault, and that he admitted that in the night he would get up, and instead of going to the bathroom, he would pee on his little brother instead. And from there, she was filled with rage, and she tortured this 9-year-old for 1 or 2 weeks, beating him, punching him, kicking him, making him drink Windex, putting him in the shower with water so hot that it broke the skin on his feet and the lower half of his body. And she said specifically of this, and I quote, his skin came off. Over the 2 weeks that she did this, she says that she stayed pretty drunk on vodka while she would assault him. She even went as far as to cutting off his air supply on 2 different occasions, once by putting a bag over his head until he passed out, and once by strangling him by lifting him off the ground with a belt until he passed out. And she, while confessing, she told the investigator that she didn't feel bad recounting this, like it didn't make her feel bad when she was retelling the story, but that she knew that doing it was evil and knew that she was evil. She tells the investigator that finally, after a period of 2 weeks or so, his body could no longer take the abuse, and that he had like labored breathing that sounded like wheezing or panting, and that he needed to throw up, he needed to go to the bathroom, but he couldn't physically do it. And she said that she tried to perform CPR on him, but it didn't work. And she was particularly triggered in this memory because she said that she could smell like beef stew on his breath that she had given him the night before. She says that he had asked her for pizza and that she had told him no. And that note just stuck out to me because she couldn't even like give this kid like a last meal of sorts, you know? It's just... Stephen died as a result of his numerous injuries on August 30th, 2012. After he died, she sat on the ground against the wall and just stared at him. His mother then went and wrapped him in his favorite Paul Frank monkey blanket and placed his body in the deep freeze in her living room. She claims that she didn't mean to kill Stephen, that she did mean to hurt him, that she meant to severely hurt him as a punishment for what she says he had done, but that his death was ultimately an accident. And she said specifically of this, and I quote, "If I had killed Stephen intentionally, I would definitely be proud to say I did, but I didn't." Proud. This woman is disgusting. Michelle says that after Stephen was killed, she did plan to turn herself in. She said she even called her Aunt Angela, who was a Detroit police child abuse investigator, might I add. But that when she called her, she just couldn't do it. She just couldn't admit it. Didn't stop her from collecting the money that she got, like from the government, for her deceased child now, but that's neither here nor there. But she says that when she called her aunt, she just said to her instead, like, "If anything was to happen, would you take care of the kids for me?" And her aunt was like, "Bro, you gotta get it together. You always lean on me." From here, 9 months went by. 9 months went by with Stephen's body in the freezer in the living room. And that's just so crazy to me, especially because, like, yes, she had her youngest son, but Stony was 13. And her other daughter was even older than Stony. So these older kids are living in this house with their brother's body in the freezer. And we find out later that, yes, they knew he was there. So it's just absolutely crazy to consider. But now we move on to Stony. Speaking of Stony, she was the next to be killed. And Michelle says that 9 months after finding out that Stephen had been abusing her youngest son, she then learned that Stony had also been abusing her youngest son. She says that her youngest told her that Stony had been abusing him and had been abusing Stephen when Stephen was alive. And she says at this point that she had lost it, that she couldn't believe that her older daughter could have done what she had done, that she could sit there and watch her abuse Stephen to the point that he died and not say anything, not admit to what she had done, and then to have gone on to continue abusing her youngest son, even in the wake of learning what her mother was capable of. And she says at this point, she just completely lost it on Stony, and that Stephen's death was an accident, but that Stony's death was on purpose. Michelle says that she goes and she confronts Stony, and that she does admit it eventually, but that's after she's been tortured by her mother, that she admits that yes, she had sexually abused both boys, and she did it because she hated them. And when Michelle asked, like, why would Stephen not tell me this while I'm torturing him for weeks on end? Why would he not tell me what you had done? And she said that in the periods of time that she said that Stony said, that in the periods of time where Michelle would like take a break from abusing Stephen, Stony would then go in and abuse Stephen and say that she would kill him if he was to tell their mom what Stony had been doing. And she says that Stony admitted that she would sexually abuse Stephen, and then the two of them at the same time would then go and abuse her youngest son. And from there, from that realization, Michelle went on to torture Stony, prolonged torture. She would beat her. She would choke her with a t-shirt. She would starve her. She would suffocate her with a plastic bag and throw scalding water on her. She would beat her over the head with a thick wooden stick, saying that she made, quote, little lumps everywhere, but that Stony was still alive. And she says that each day she says she learned more and more information from her youngest son, and as she did, she would drink more alcohol and she would beat Stony worse and worse. She says that her youngest would give her more and more details over the days of what Stony did, how Stony raped him, and that, this is so gross. She says that her youngest even said that Stony would take out her menstrual pad and like squeeze the blood into his mouth, which that's just fucking extreme. Like all of this case is so hard and it's so just gross. you know, it's a lot. I know it's a lot. I'm aware of how much this is. I almost didn't even cover it, but I feel like it needs to be. I've never heard anyone talk about this, and I feel like it's crazy because it's such an intense case. And she says that she continued to abuse and torture Stony until eventually her body too gave out. And this was, well, her body didn't give out. She was killed on May 25th, 2013. Michelle says that on this day, Stony had been sleeping on the floor when she woke up to her mother standing directly above her with the two of them face to face. And Michelle says that she then asked Stony, like, are you ready to apologize to your brother? And she says that Stony apologized for abusing someone in that way in general, but didn't specifically apologize for abusing her brother. And this did not please Michelle. She's like, oh, you're sorry for doing this to someone, but not sorry for doing this to your brother specifically. She says that she started punching Stony, and that this time, for the first time ever, Stony actually punched her back and apparently immediately regretted it and apologized and said that it was a reflex and she didn't mean to do it. And what's really fucked up here, this note just bothered me, is she says that Stony always had trouble standing up for herself in general, like as a 13-year-old in life, she had trouble asserting herself, and that when Stony hit her back, she was strangely proud of her. And that note just really upset me. And she says from there, I can only imagine a woman this abusive, your kid hits you back, how pissed she would be. She says that she grabbed a t-shirt, the black shirt that was found around Stony's neck when she was found in the freezer, and she tied it around her neck to strangle her, and then put a bag over her face and smothered her to death. The medical examiner later said of Stony's injuries, and I quote, she had multiple blows to the head. The entire scalp was suffused with hemorrhage, which meant that she had received numerous impacts over the head. She had every body surface covered with something. Wherever you looked, there was either a scar or an ulceration. When Michelle tortured her kids, it wasn't just physical abuse, it was also psychological torture. She would go from periods of time where she would relentlessly beat them, starve them, maybe feeding them once a day, to being calm, talking to them, feeding them. They never knew what version of their mother they were going to get that day because she yo-yoed so hard from aggressively abusing them to acting like a normal person. A normal person doesn't do what she did. And I can't even imagine how terrifying this was for those kids. After Stony was killed, her body was then placed in the freezer on top of Stephen's, but it wasn't Michelle who put Stony in the freezer. Michelle made her eldest daughter do it. And that note just destroys me. I can't even imagine what it was like to be these kids in this house, dude. I hate this woman. But she was later interviewed. Michelle was interviewed, and she was asked, like, why did you put Stony on top of Stephen like that? Like, how could you do something like that? And she responded, quote, I only had one deep freezer. Where was she gonna go? She's just so evil. It's so fucked up, dude. On top of making her eldest child put her dead sibling on top of her other dead sibling, she then made her youngest and her eldest look in the freezer at their dead brother and sister. And then kept the freezer in the living room, in like the main part of the house, as a constant reminder to those kids of what she had done, what she was capable of, and what she could then go on to do to them. And apparently when she showed them their bodies, the two just cried. Michelle's Aunt Angela, the aunt that Michelle was so concerned with speaking with during her interrogation, a woman that we're going to talk more about at length a little bit later because I do have some thoughts. She said of Michelle's surviving children, and I quote, pray for those children. They saw things that nobody should ever have to see. I have no idea what it was like for them to live with those bodies all that time. I can't even imagine. Now, Michelle says that when she showed her children the bodies of their dead siblings, that her youngest son, the one who she says was being abused the whole time, had said that he didn't cry, that he said that she had saved him. Now, this is what she says that he said, but I do not believe it's true because later there's a hearing where Michelle's actually trying to retain guardianship of her two surviving children. Why? Who the fuck knows? We'll get more into that again later. But during this hearing, her youngest contradicts the statement that his mother saved him. And he instead talks at length about how he was also aggressively physically abused by his mother, okay, Michelle, and that he thinks she deserves to go to jail, and that he saw her murder his siblings. This woman is just plain evil. She murdered 2 of her children, dude, and then psychologically tortured her surviving kids by letting them see their dead siblings' bodies and then keeping them in the freezer as a constant reminder of what she was capable of. And these are the kids that she, quote, loved enough to get their names tattooed on her arm. The kids who now, 2 of them, she doesn't even claim anymore. She says that Stephen and Stony are no longer her kids. And she said specifically of Stephen and Stony, and I quote, "I have 2 children. That's it. Stephen and Stony are demons. Period." The Friday after the 2 children's bodies were found, a candlelight vigil was held in their honor, and many people, including friends, family members, and even governmental officials, came and stood outside the townhouse where the kids had lived and died. The porch was covered in candles and stuffed animals and balloons, and at one point during the vigil, the people who were there released balloons into the sky, yelling that they loved Stony and that they loved Stephen into the air. People present saw this crime as a sign that they needed to solidify their community because it, takes a village, and that this was a sign that they just needed to start paying attention, getting to know each other's neighbors, and to just really start focusing, because how did people go this long without even noticing that these kids were gone? But this happens a lot, right? Like, this wasn't even the first murder that happened in these apartment complex, like the apartment complex that Michelle lived in. Just a couple of years before, in 2012, another woman, a woman named Samaria Green, I believe is what her name was, she stabbed her daughter to death. I believe her daughter was only 8 years old, and she stabbed her to death in these apartments as well. And on top of that, in an interview with Michelle's Aunt Angela, she even said that she wasn't sure if Michelle was given a psychological evaluation after the initial reports of abuse had come out, because we're going to get into it in a little bit, but there were reports of abuse from, like, Michelle abusing her kids in the early 2000s. And Michelle's aunt said specifically that, quote, "they don't always do those when there are signs of abuse," the psychological evaluations, and that if they did, half the people in Detroit would be having evaluations. This woman saying that half of Detroit would be evaluated if people had to be evaluated if there were signs of child abuse. And that's just so scary. And she worked as a police officer, like in the police department, investigating child abuse. So she knows what she's talking about, at least to a point. So there was no village for these kids, these 2 kids that were murdered and then kept in a freezer for years. Nobody reported them missing. Nobody said or did anything. Nobody even noticed. Michelle even went into the kids' school and pulled them out of school. Not even just the 2 not even just Stony and Stephen. She pulled all 4 of her kids out of school, telling the school that she was moving, but telling other people that she was homeschooling them, even though she herself had dropped out of school in the 10th grade and really didn't have the education to homeschool her kids, right? And there was no follow-up on this. There is no requirement for parents to notify the school district that they're homeschooling, even though it is, quote, encouraged. The only time any sort of registration was required is if a parent's requesting special education assistance. There was nothing at all in effect statewide that alerts anyone in any sort of position in power if kids are removed from the school system, which is crazy to me, because I remember growing up thinking that my mom was going to go to jail if I ditched. You know what I mean? Like the truancy thing. I thought that was such a thing. But maybe it's state by state. I don't know. It's just, that blows my mind a little bit. You could just pull them out and everyone's like, well, deuces, kids, good luck. And apparently anytime anyone would ask Michelle, where's Stony? Where's Stephen? She would say they weren't home. They were at their friend's house. They were at an aunt's house. Anywhere but here. Anywhere but the freezer. But even though, Michelle tried to hide what she did, right? She tried to hide it from people. She lied about where the kids were. She didn't really make any attempt to try to conceal what she did when she knew she was getting evicted. You know what I mean? Maybe she couldn't physically move the freezer herself. Maybe she probably couldn't afford to hire somebody to move it. But she didn't really do anything to try to conceal the fact that there were bodies in the freezer. You know what I mean? And it's just wild to me because I don't know how evictions work in Detroit, but in California, it takes 3 to 4 months for an eviction to go through. And when the eviction's going through, you get a last notice from the sheriff, days, at least 5 days before the eviction's going to take place. They'll put a notice on your door hey, last chance, you better get out or we're going to remove you. And Michelle clearly knew that the eviction was coming because the day of it, she told one of her neighbors, oh, well, they're coming. There's dumpsters out front. Shit's about to go down. And she was talking to her neighbor. I believe her name was Miss Carey. And she even said, she clearly knew that something was up. Maybe she wanted to get caught because she told Miss Carey specifically, and I quote, "Miss Carey, if you don't ever see me again, just know that I love you." And this woman, Miss Carey, was clearly her friend and had been her friend a while and said, okay, I'm at work now, but when I get off work, I'll come and help you with this whole eviction business. And they were friends. Miss Carey said that she had even been in her house, the week before, and she said she had been there for a barbecue and she noticed the deep freeze in the living room, because it's in the living room and that's odd, but that she didn't think much of it because like everyone has a deep freeze. She herself had a deep freeze, and it's just very eerie to now know that the kids had been in there all this time. So Michelle was arrested and she was initially held on a $1 million bond, but this is when she was just being charged with child abuse and wasn't yet being charged with the murders. Michelle, who appeared at this hearing by video call, showed little emotion, and she actually tried leaving the hearing early and had to be called back to finish. She was also ordered that she wasn't allowed to have any contact with neighbors at the apartment complex where she lived or with any of her surviving children. Initially, Michelle was charged with 4 counts of first-degree child abuse and 1 count of committing first-degree child abuse in the presence of a minor. And the court ended up entering a plea of not guilty on her behalf. But eventually, she did get many more charges tacked on with that. And in the end, I think she had like 17 different charges against her. These charges included felony murder, first-degree premeditated murder, torture, and the first-degree child abuse charge, and at this point, she was held without bond. So once Michelle was arrested and her 2 surviving children were out of her grasp, they were able to be interviewed, and they were interviewed by a company called Kids Talk, which is a child advocacy group that was like hired on by the county. And in speaking to the kids and being able to like actually get information from them, they were able to find out what really went on in that house with Michelle, because Michelle would lead you to believe that she was a good mother, just trying her best, and that these instances of abuse with Stony and Stephen were outliers, that they were freak occurrences. But in talking to the kids, they found that this clearly wasn't the case. All of these kids were abused for years, dude. On the day that Stephen and Stony were found, the 2 surviving children were given medical examinations, and they were found to both be covered in scars. The 8-year-old boy, the youngest, had, quote, 25 scars and injuries, both old and new, on his back, as well as, quote, loop-shaped scars and injuries on his back and his buttocks that were consistent with being whipped with an extension cord. During Michelle's oldest daughter, her teenage daughter's examination, they noticed that there was a cut above her left eye, and they asked her how that happened, and she said her mother hit her in the face with a 2x4. And they noticed also that one of her front teeth were broken, and when they asked her how that had happened, she said that her mother had smacked her in the mouth with a curling iron. She also had scars from being burned with irons and whipped with cords, and she said that her mother refused to get her or any of her siblings medical attention, despite this woman having Medicaid for all 4 of her children. She had governmental insurance for all of her kids, but she wasn't getting them assistance because she was the one hurting them. Once Michelle was arrested and this started to come out, people were shocked. Michelle seemed to a lot of people to just be a good mother trying her best. Her brother, as I said, was shocked. Remember, he thought she didn't have any emotional problems. And one of Michelle's old neighbors, it was a friend who had moved out, but after he moved out of the complex, they stayed friends. They talked all the time. I think they talked like once a week. He said that Michelle loved her kids and that she was very overprotective of them and very like defensive of them. Like she was like mama bear type. And he said specifically of her and her kids, quote, "From what I knew, she loved them to damn pieces." That was clearly a very loose quote, but you get what I'm saying. And this neighbor said when he learned what had happened that he was blown away and in complete shock by it. And so was another neighbor named Jessica. Jessica said that Michelle loved her kids, that she homeschooled her kids, and that she was super proud of them, and she would even super glue her kids' assignments and drawings to the living room walls because she was so proud of how well they had done. This neighbor continued saying, quote, "I can't believe it. It's really scary living next to someone that you never really knew." She said that Michelle and her family were very normal looking looking from the outside in, that nobody had any idea. And she said something that just really icked me. And when you hear it, you'll get it. She said, and I quote, "I remember how many times I was in that house leaning on that freezer. I had never seen anything out of the ordinary." Other neighbors just seemed to think that Michelle was totally normal. They would let their kids have slumber parties at her house. But there are contradicting statements when it comes to how people perceived her, and that could be because she was a different person, depending on who you talk to, because according to reports from, I believe it's Fox 2 and People.com, 99% sure it was those two publications, if you will, they said that Michelle had openly admitted to several of her neighbors that she had killed her kids, and that nobody said anything, nobody did anything, nobody reported anything. That's to say, at least recently, nobody did anything, nobody said anything, because there were reports of Michelle abusing her kids reported to CPS in 2002 and in 2005. And at that time, CPS did intervene. They came, they looked into the situation, and they substantiated the claims that Michelle was abusing her kids. And they even had her, you know, go into counseling and other services, but she retained custody of the kids. When asked about this, about Michelle, you know, being looked into for child abuse and how she got to keep her kids and all the things that she was supposed to do, the counseling and all of that, one of the representatives, Bob, his name was Bob, he said essentially that he couldn't really say much because of privacy laws, which, okay, sure, but that basically they didn't have any responsibility to follow up further with the family if Michelle completed her programs that she was supposed to. Now, is that to say that she did complete them and that's why they didn't look into it? Or is that to say that he wasn't really sure what he could and could not say at that point? It sounds a lot like passing the buck to me, but that could just be me. He was just essentially like, the cases are closed, and once the cases are closed, we can't do anything. And it just seems like nobody wanted to do anything. I don't know, it just makes me crazy. Like, even the children's great aunt Angela, the one who she wanted to talk to while she was being arrested, she even said that, first off, let me back up. After Michelle got arrested, just so you know, going into this, after Michelle got arrested, her 2 surviving children were sent initially to stay with Aunt Angela, okay? Aunt Angela said that she knew that abuse was going on in that house, but not to that level. I just do not understand why this was able to keep going on. It's so frustrating because, like Angela said that once she told Michelle, like, I have to back up. I'm getting so frustrated. She said that she used to really help Michelle and really help take care of the kids. Like, she had a lot of responsibility in that. She took on a lot of responsibility in that. But that once she told Michelle, like, you need to get it together, you need to get a job, you need to go back to school, you need to do something, that Michelle had cut her off, completely isolated herself from the kids, and just basically cut out all of the extended family. Like, totally. When Angela was asked why she didn't react to the signs of abuse, she said that that was a valid question that she would also ask herself. Now, I'm not usually a judgy fucking bitch, but okay, maybe I am. Well, I'm gonna be right now. What the fuck, Angela? If what I am reading is correct, first off, you worked as a police child abuse investigator, okay? And that you knew that in this home, child abuse was happening, but not to that level. And then Michelle, who's already abusing her kids, cuts off all communication with you. All. Doesn't talk to you, doesn't talk to any of the family, just falls off the planet, and you do nothing, you report nothing. That is your job. And these kids were your family. Inexcusable. And then this is the woman who the court decides that the 2 remaining children should go and stay with while they figure out the custody situation. I would like to know who made that call. Anyway, sorry, I got off on like a big thing there, and I know I must have jumbled over my words, and that might have been hard to even follow. I'm just very passionate. When I get passionate or upset, interested, passionate, upset, any of the above, A, B, or C, I start to talk a little bit fast. I start to get a little bit jabbery. I get comments a lot that I talk too fast. It's because I care. But I'm just so pissed off because all of these adults were not doing the best things that they could. They were not being the best versions of themselves. They weren't being as responsible as they should be. And as a result, there's 2 dead children in a freezer. And those stakes are just too high, and that's inexcusable. But I digress. Remember how I said that Michelle had a not guilty plea entered on her behalf? Well, she surprised everybody in court. It seems like she even surprised her own attorney when she decided to turn around and be like, you know what, actually, I've thought this over. I thought it real good. I've been thinking. And I'm not a coward. So I'm actually going to plead guilty, and I will please take the death penalty if it's on the table. In response, the Judge King, was like, well, I'm going to give you 1 more week to think about it because, like, these are serious charges. And Michelle responded, like, I'm certain in my decision. I don't need another week to think it over. But the judge was firm and didn't let her enter that guilty plea, like, right off the bat. The judge had gotten new information regarding Michelle's psych evaluation and wanted to make sure to look it over before accepting the plea. And Michelle was pissed, saying that she had a big problem with it and thought it was ridiculous, but the judge wanted to ensure that Michelle's rights were protected first in case she did have some sort of mental incapacity. You're not going to let somebody who can't mentally make decisions make such a serious decision. In the end, Michelle's guilty plea was accepted and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite her attorney, I believe, really trying to convince her not to enter this plea, because in every article I read, it says that he discussed the plea with her at least 3 times. He's listen, I tried. I don't want her coming back later and trying to appeal and saying that I didn't do my job, because I did my job. The bitch wanted to go to jail. And I say the bitch with all disrespect. I did think it was worth mentioning because it really irked me that her attorney did also say that these murders, the torture murders of her children, were an unfortunate situation and that Michelle had been in a difficult situation. And I don't know. That just really bothered me, because what the fuck? That's putting it as lightly as humanly possible. And when I read it, I could not move past it, and so I thought that you should dwell in this anger with me. The judge said to Michelle of her crimes, and I quote, "As a mother, one of your primary responsibilities was to protect your children, and in that respect, you failed in the worst possible way." Michelle did end up losing custody of her 2 surviving children, not custody, but her parental rights. For some reason, she was fighting for this. She thought that people were going to be yeah, listen, I know you killed 2 of your kids, but the other 2, sure, make decisions. No, obviously, bitch, you're not going to get to keep custody of your children. So the court was trying to take away her parental rights and also the parental rights of the 2's biological fathers. They had 2 separate fathers. The son would have been 8 around this time, and the daughter would have been 17. So the boy would have been put up for adoption, and I guess the teenage girl would have kind of been on her own, which is really sad, but she's about to be an adult. So what else can you do, And during the meantime, the kids were staying with their Aunt Angela, as I said, and the fathers were allowed to have supervised visits while CPS was there, while they were in the process of having custody and their parental rights basically dissolved. So the 2 surviving kids had different fathers. The young boy who survives' father was 31, and his name was Stephen, and I believe he was also young Stephen's father. And the teenage girl's father was 35, and his name was Alexander, and apparently he was also Stony's father. So Papa Stephen was the young surviving boy's dad, and Stephen, who was murdered's dad, and Papa Alexander was the teenage daughter who survives' dad and Stony's dad. And listen, the 2 surviving kids, I have seen their names in reportings, but in a lot of reportings, they're kept anonymous, likely for good reason, so I'm respectfully not saying their names. So I'm sorry if it gets a little confusing, but they're kids, and that's the decision I've made here. Now, Michelle clearly did not like her children's fathers, because when she was brought in the courtroom, she flipped both of them off, and it's probably because of a couple reasons. I mean, it's very, every relationship is there's a lot to it, but 1, they owed her a lot of child support, and 2, neither of them were super present in their kids' lives. I mean, they were both dead in a freezer for years, and the dads didn't know, so I think it's safe to say that they weren't super involved. Alexander, Stony's father, had lived with Michelle for several years, but he and Michelle had separated after their first daughter was born. Clearly, they were still physical, though, because, Stony. He said he hadn't seen Stony in about 2 years, but that she was, quote, fine the last time he saw her. He basically said that Michelle had told him, had forbid him from seeing Stony, which is a cop-out in my opinion. That's my position. That'll always be my position when it comes to these things. And that anytime he asked where she was, Michelle said she was with a neighbor or with a family member. According to Alexander's sister, Alexander was trying to still be in his daughter's lives, even though the high school relationship had ended, but that Michelle made it very difficult, and that anytime he tried to be around, tried to talk to the kids, tried to engage at all, she made it very difficult for him to do so. Now listen, I don't doubt that that's true. Especially based on who Michelle is as a person, I totally believe that she made his life very, very difficult if he tried to see or talk to the girls, right? But here's the thing. Nothing could stop me from seeing my son if I was in this situation where me and my husband were not together. Nothing. I hate this excuse. I hate this excuse that you hear usually from fathers for not seeing their kids. I hate their baby mama's crazy blah, blah, fucking blah. No, nothing. Nothing can keep me from my son. You've got a crazy ex. You want to see your kid? Go to court, fight for your kid. It's such bullshit, and this is a hill that I will always die on. I had a really close friend who was dating this guy, and she told me that he had a kid he didn't see, and I was just like, how is this not such a fucking deal breaker? And she said the same thing. His baby's mom is crazy. Every time he talks to her, she makes it difficult for him. Okay, well, he is a deadbeat who doesn't fight to see his kid. And that is the greater evil to me. I feel very strongly about this, not just in this case, just in general. This is a hill that I aggressively die on. So I just want you to know that it's not this case specific. This is just something that I very strongly feel. And I hate that excuse because it's just bullshit. It's just bullshit. And Michelle's attorney actually echoed my sentiments. He was like, listen, I have a kid. Nothing would stop me from seeing my kid. If you wanted to, you could. And if you were worried and you couldn't get a hold of them, you could always call in a welfare check. You could do something. He said that this wasn't just a case of Michelle not letting these men see their kids, but these men not wanting to actively try to see their kids. Michelle claimed during the hearing that she had read Alexander's family's impact statements and that they were full of lies, that she didn't keep the girls from seeing their father, that they used to go over all the time, and that the only reason the visit stopped is because Alexander's father got caught being inappropriate with another underage female relative, and that on one occasion, the girls, her daughters, woke up to find him laying in their room. And that's why she stopped allowing the girls to go over and see their father, but that he was more than welcome to come over and see them. I'm sure the truth falls somewhere in the middle there. I do think that that little bit of information about the father's father is interesting. I don't know how much I trust what comes out of Michelle's mouth, but it is interesting considering what we're talking about here. Now, for fairness, I will say that I did read that Alexander was unemployed. That's why he owed so much in child support, and that he couldn't even afford bus fare to go and see his girls, and that it was too far to walk. But I just don't know. I don't know. He did also say that he was the one who reported her to CPS, I believe in 2005, because the girls had come to stay with him, and he had noticed whip marks on them, but that he never asked Michelle how they got there because he didn't want to argue. So it's just... everything about this case makes me unhappy, as I'm sure you can imagine. And I do still feel bad for him, don't get me wrong. He still lost his daughter, and I can't imagine how traumatizing that is, especially to know that you didn't try harder to see her, and you did try to call CPS before, and this still happened. And with him in particular, I did read that he didn't even know about his daughter dying until a reporter called him to question him about it, and that's how he learned about it. So that in itself is just devastating as well. Apparently the same reporter did try to call Stephen as well, the boy's father, and the number that he called, whoever answered the phone, hung up immediately when the reporter started talking, and when he called back, they didn't answer. So I don't really know what his situation is. I do know from what I read online, it doesn't appear that he's seen his son since 2012. And like Alexander, he owed Michelle a good amount in child support. I guess he had been making payments, but stopped making payments, and right around the time that all of this happened, he had recently been in and out of jail. That's basically the most I could figure out about him. Actually, there was one more thing about him. He was asked if he felt partially responsible for what happened to Stephen, and he did take ownership of that, and he did say yes, that he felt like he could have done more to protect him, which is something, I guess. And Michelle just, man, she did not like these guys. She yelled at them in court. She screamed at them in court saying, and I quote, "I did it. I never tried to say I didn't. I did it. But that does not negate the fact that they were never there for their children." At the end of this hearing, Alexander did say that he didn't believe his rights should be terminated because he was her father and he didn't do anything wrong. And Stephen declined to comment. But in the end, both Michelle and both fathers did end up losing their parental rights to the remaining children. Now, from what I can read online, it does seem like the two kids are okay. I hope they got the therapy they need. I think they did. What I read, it seems like they got the therapy they needed because, man, they would really need it. I can't imagine what they went through to be living in that house, to know what your mom had done to your siblings, to have seen it happen, and to just have that freezer in the living room as a constant reminder, and then to have her beating you and just wondering when it was going to be your turn. When were you going to end up being put in the freezer as well? It's just, it's a nightmare. It is a nightmare. But the teenage daughter would be an adult now. She was set to graduate in 2017 with plans to go to college, and the young boy had been adopted. I didn't see by who. I know Michelle said that she wanted her Aunt Angela to be the one who adopted him, but I don't know if that's what happened. I just know that, he was adopted and she wasn't because she was 17, and she ended up being in like an independent living home during her transitional period. The judge said of the children in the aftermath of their mother's upbringing, and I quote, "Both children overcame the majority of the setbacks they encountered in this case." So where Michelle's children have been working on improvement since she was arrested, Michelle has not been following suit. Not at all. Since being in jail, she's at least twice been charged with assaulting prison employees. In at least one of these instances, she was accused of throwing her own feces and urine at a corrections officer. I guess she like put it in a Pringles can, and when the officer came over to take her food tray, she was just like, and like threw it on them, which is just so gross, dude. Come on. Who does that? We live in a society. Well, she does. She doesn't. She lives in jail. But you know what I mean? Like, ugh. They also say that she spits at people, assaults people, and threatens to kill people. She kicked a cop in the stomach and in the arm. And in 2019, she had had 49 incidences against her since being in prison. So that would be 49 incidences from 2015 to 2019. And it was so bad that for a long time she was in segregation, but from what I read, she's now in general population. In the general population. Gen Pop. So this woman is evil, right? She said herself in her interrogation that she is evil. What she did is evil, but there seem to be two different versions of this woman, both in how other people see her and how she perceives herself. First, she says she loves her kids. During her interrogation, she even asked the officers if they could please, like the girl who was interrogating her, if she could get to her kids and to please like give them a hug and tell them that she loved them, and not to tell them that she was crying because she didn't want them to worry about her. She also talked about loving her kids on her Facebook page. Michelle's Facebook page said, and I quote, "Loyal to my babies." And she had shared a post that said, quote, "There is no greater blessing than being called a mom." So there's that version of her, which is like a good mother who like loves her kids and talks about them and like puts their work up on the wall at home and protects them. There's that version of her to some people and to her. A version people trusted enough to let her babysit their kids. But then in the same breath, or not the same breath, but then from the same woman, she says that Stephen and Stony are demons, and that yes, she killed them, and yet that yes, she would do it again if she had the chance. And it doesn't seem like her opinion on that has even changed. After being arrested, she did a jailhouse interview with Crime Watch Daily, and she said that she stands by what she initially said. She had not like swayed or felt remorse with time to really sit and think about what she did. And she said, and I quote, "At first I cried, but I would kill them again. There were no other options." Now, why did Michelle do this? This is really the question, right? There's some back and forth on whether or not it's true that Stephen and Stony were abusing their brother. I know that there was a jailhouse informant that came out, somebody who was in jail with Michelle, who said that Michelle said she made the whole thing up, that she lied about the abuse to get sympathy for what she had done, that it was just chronic abuse that had gone overboard, and then she lied to, get off. But then there was a reporter who was in the court, named Vicky Thomas, I believe, who said that during this hearing there was a recording played from the young boy, and in this recording he did discuss abuse at the hands of his siblings. And this reporter, Vicky, said specifically, and I quote, "He said his sister Stony raped him and also made allegations of inappropriate touching by his brother Stephen." And after this reporting was played in court, Michelle looked over at the fathers who were sitting together and just yelled, "See, look what your daughter did to my son." So it does seem like it's possible that the little boy was being abused by his siblings, but I didn't find clarification on exactly how, the specifics. So I can't really tell you that today. Now, I will say this. Is it possible that Stony and Stephen were abusing their brother? Yes, of course it's possible. But I will say that that's a big if they were abusing their brother, there's a good chance, it's almost a certainty that somebody was doing this to them as well, because they were kids, right? Stony's 13, Stephen's even younger. So if Stephen and Stony were doing this to their brother, they got this from somewhere. You know what I mean? They're not just going to wake up one day and do this. Whether it be somebody doing it to Stony and then her doing it to Stephen and it trickling down from there, I don't know. But this isn't the type of thing that would just pop into a child's head without some sort of reference point. It's just such a fucked up situation all around. Because if they were abusing their brother, they needed help. They needed help. They needed therapy. They needed something. But they did not need or deserve to be beaten and starved and burned and suffocated by their mother. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't have any sympathy for people who sexually abuse or hurt children, but these two were also children. Now, a reason that if this is true, if this did happen, a reason that this could have particularly enraged Michelle is because she has said that she was sexually abused as a child, and that it enraged her in such a way because she knew how her young son had felt, because she had been in that position and had felt that way before. She said that as a kid she had told her mother about the abuse, and that her mom had just been like, well, what do you want me to do about it? It's already done. It's already happened. And that her mother stayed friends with this person. This person was a woman, and it was a woman who had abused her and her brother. And that her mother stayed friends with her, so she'd have to see her all the time, still at their house, still socializing, still have to be around this person. And that it made her feel like stupid for even telling her mother, and ashamed. And that to this day, she doesn't talk to her mother and father. She did say she can't use this as an excuse because she is an adult and she made her choices, but she was using it more of a way to explain, not excuse, her behavior, because of what happened to her, she has a serious issue with people abusing kids. And Michelle says that she talked to her kids about this, that she talked to them about what happened to her, who did it, and how it made her feel. And she told them to tell her if anyone was ever to do anything like that to them. She said that she told them that rape is the worst thing you can do to a person, and that that's why she was so rageful, because she had explained so explicitly why this was so bad. So that means to her that Stony and Stephen knew exactly how bad what they were doing was. And I just don't know, man. I don't know what I think about this case. I mean, I know what I think about certain things, but what I don't know is what really happened here, what really happened in that house. I don't know if Stony and Stephen really abused their brother. I don't know if they were abused themselves. I don't know if they just admitted this because their mother was literally torturing them. Like, it's so hard to really know the truth. One thing I do know, one thing I do really truly believe is that deep down inside, something that I think is the truth is that Michelle is an evil woman. She's a monster. She is a horrible person who abused her kids, including the child that she was trying to save from Stephen and Stony for years. She terrorized and tortured all of those children and then murdered 2 of them, and then kept them in a public place in the home so that the other kids would be in continued fear for a prolonged period of time, for years. And they had no one in their corner, no one that they could run to, no one that they could turn to, no one to protect them from the one person whose fucking job it was to keep them safe. Their terrorizer, their mother. Anyways, now that I have given you all the information on this case, I want you to revisit the question of the day, and that is this. Do you believe what Michelle says? Do you believe that Michelle's son was being abused by his 2 older siblings? Or do you believe that this is something that Michelle made up to justify her prolonged, chronic abuse that just went too far? Please come, gather around, and let me tell you the story of the horrible murder of Dylan Groves. Dylan James Groves was born in Ohio on January 10th, 2019, which makes him a Capricorn. Dylan did not have an easy or ideal start to his life. Dylan came into the earth screaming like most babies do, but his cries weren't for the same reasons most babies cry. Not trying out his new voice, not the sudden surprise of light in being in this new big world. Dylan was screaming because he was suffering from painful withdrawals, drug withdrawals. Baby Dylan had been born with illegal drugs in his system due to his mother using drugs while she was pregnant. Baby Dylan was born with amphetamines, methamphetamines, fentanyl, opiates, and morphine in his system. Within a week of his life, he was removed from the care of his mother, 39-year-old Jessica Groves, and his father, 41-year-old Daniel Groves, and put into the care of Scioto County Children's Services, and ended up being placed with a foster mother named Andrea. When Dylan's mother, Jessica Groves, found out that she was pregnant with this little boy, she essentially did nothing. She didn't go to the doctor. She didn't celebrate him and her. She didn't even tell people. It was like she was gonna hide it and not say anything and not tell anyone and just pretend it wasn't happening. But that was until she was a couple months along and she started to show, and she had a teenage son. Her and Daniel had a teenage son as well. I believe the teenage son's name was Daniel Jr. And one day he like looked at her and he's like, "Yo, Mom, are you with child perhaps?" And she's like, "You got me." And at that point, admitted that she was even pregnant. And the records show that Jessica never even received any sort of prenatal care until the day that she went into labor. And that blows my mind as a current pregnant person to imagine not even going to the doctor at all. That's the first thing I did. I was like, please check this, make sure this baby is chilling, not killing, doing everything right. Like, it just blows my mind to think of her not doing that, not going, not hearing like the little heartbeat. And from my experience, that's just insane. Anyways, when she did finally go into labor, she did go to the hospital. I guess she was not willing to try to give birth to this baby in her home by herself. But when she got there, it was very, very clear to all of the medical staff that she was high on something. She was clearly on drugs because she was like very, very pregnant, very much in labor. They had given her no painkillers, but she was just chilling, having a good time. And I've heard from the grapevine, especially lately, that giving birth really sucks. Most people straight up do not have a good time, but she was just sitting there maxing and relaxing, chilling, not killing, having no issue with the fact that she was in labor. And when they checked her, like her cervix, she was already 10 centimeters dilated, which I hear is the max. So she was maxed out, ready to give birth, and was having no pain at all because she was on drugs. Jessica was also super evasive to the hospital staff. She would not offer up any information. She would not answer any questions. And when the doctors were like, listen, we know that you're on drugs. What kind of drugs are you on? We need to know so that we can help your baby. This has to do with your baby's health. We don't care. We don't care about you. I'm not here for your crimes. We need to know how to best treat your baby. She refused to tell them. And she wouldn't even do a drug test, like the urine test. She would not give them urine so that they could test and find out themselves. So they ended up having to take her urine through a catheter, and that's when it was determined that she was all messed up. She wouldn't talk to the hospital staff. As I said, all she would say was, it's coming, when referring to her new baby. And Daniel was there, obviously, the father, because that's what you do, but he wouldn't talk to the hospital officials either. Hospital staff noted that Jessica was just super odd all around. Like, okay, so it wasn't even just that she was on drugs, because sadly, apparently, kids being born addicted to drugs is far more common than I realize, and probably more common than any of us would like to realize. Apparently, this is a serious problem of people just still using drugs when they're pregnant, so the kid's coming out addicted to drugs. So that part they took into account. But Jessica just seemed like she didn't care at all about her son and seemed completely indifferent to the fact that he was being born at all. Both Jessica and Daniel just seemed really indifferent, like they didn't care, like they didn't even really want him when he was taken out of the room at first, because he was born all, with issues. They never asked to go and see him. Jessica never asked for him to be brought back to her room so she could see him. And when he was first born and had his first bath, she only held him for a couple of minutes. I guess eventually Daniel did, after a while, go to the nursery and see baby Dylan, but the hospital staff in the nursery noted that when he ended up going to visit the baby, he seemed different at that point, like he was probably on drugs at this point as well, where before he didn't seem like he was. It's like he went, used, and then went and saw the baby. During the murder trial, several of the nurses who were present when baby Dylan was born were brought in to testify, and they noted that when they would try to get information from Jessica and she'd refuse to give them information, they would then ask Daniel a direct question, since, he was her husband, the baby's father. He should be able to give information also. And when they would ask him a question, he would kind of like look at Jessica to see if he had permission to answer it. And the only information he really ended up offering up to hospital staff was that Jessica had used heroin 2 days before baby Dylan was born, and that the reason she had never gone to any of her prenatal appointments is because she was too high to go. Despite all of this, despite the drug use and despite the fact that she never went to any prenatal appointments, baby Dylan was born but he was in not great shape. He didn't look good, not like a healthy baby should. And he was addicted to drugs, the drugs that his mother had been taking during her pregnancy. And he was suffering from withdrawals and tremors and would have spasms and it would just sweat and cry because of it, because he was in pain and suffering, which just makes my heart ache. To imagine a tiny little baby like that in pain? No. Dylan ended up being transferred to another area of the hospital where they take the little babies that need more attention. And he was kept there for several days so they could monitor him and see how bad his addiction and his symptoms were and perform this thing called a Finnegan test every 4 hours, which essentially assesses 21 of the most common signs of neonatal drug withdrawal. Babies born addicted that are going through withdrawal suffer from tremors, sneezing, loose stools, not sleeping, and they cry from their pain. So once baby Dylan was able to leave the hospital, as I said, he was taken away from his parents and he was sent to live with a foster mother named Andrea. But even though she was his foster mother, his biological parents, Jessica and Daniel, were able to go and have visitation. I think they only had one visitation visit. Yep. I think they only had one because she didn't have baby Dylan very long, which we'll get into. But it was clear to Andrea when both Jessica and Daniel were at the house that Jessica, again, was clearly on something by the way she was talking, the way she was acting, the energy level the woman had. So after the visit, once the couple left, Andrea called CPS and she was like, listen, this is what I reported, or this is what I saw, this is what I need to report. And I mean, like, why wouldn't she? Her job is to make sure the baby's safe. So if the mom comes over and it's blasted out of her mind, it's kind of her responsibility to report it, but it hardly ended up mattering that she did so, which we will get into soon. Now, while Dylan was with Andrea, Dylan's father, Daniel Groves, was actually going through the processes and the steps that he needed to go through legally to be able to get custody of his son back. And this had certain provisions, certain stipulations that he had to adhere to, and one of them was that he himself had to be able to pass a drug test, and he actually did take and pass a drug test. We'll get into that later. But because of this, within 2 weeks of baby Dylan being put in Andrea's care, I believe it was 12 days to be exact, he ended up being returned to his father, Daniel Groves, through the family reunification process through recovery, because basically the way the system works is that reunification is the goal. You want the baby, you want the children to be back with their parents. Though I think what's best for the children should be the main focus, it is seen as children being back with their families is what's best for the children. And it just seems like in some situations, this one being one of them, another one being Josh Powell, that's not a perfect system. It's a broken system, and things that are horrible like this and like Josh Powell and his kids happen. And it's really, really sad because this decision broke baby Dylan's foster mother Andrea's heart, because deep down she had actually hoped that she would have been able to get custody of him. She wanted to end up adopting him. She really, really loved that little baby. But either way, Daniel, his father, was able to regain custody of baby Dylan under the stipulations that one main one was that his wife, Jessica Groves, was not allowed to live in the family home. And they thought this was going to work, even though the two lived together, had a 14-year-old son together, had been married for like 20 years. They just assumed that, yeah, she'd move out, no problem. That's going to work. So let's do that. Let's put the baby back in that situation. In addition to Jessica not being allowed to live in the home or have any alone time with baby Dylan, she also had to take classes on substance abuse and parenting, and Daniel had to continue to pass drug tests and be available for both court hearings, at-home visits, all of these different things that he had to be available to do. He just basically had to be available to take the baby in to get tested, take himself in to get tested, have at-home visits, go to court dates. He had to make sure to be doing all these things, plus keeping Jessica out of the house and not alone with the baby. I hope that sentence came out right. I feel like my brain, this is the baby brain that everyone keeps commenting about, because I feel like I'm stupider today than I was yesterday. At first, Daniel was really on top of his shit. He was very compliant. He made sure to go to all of the appointments he needed to go to. He went to court dates. He went to doctor's checkups. He did all of his drug tests. He was available for the social workers to come and visit. But shortly after, baby Dylan was returned home, he just kind of went MIA and fell off the map. And this is a problem for several reasons. One, the fact that he has a baby, and two, at the time that I'm 99% sure at the time that he got Dylan back and was supposed to be doing all of these things, he was also on probation. I believe his crimes were just theft related, not violent crimes, but still he was on probation and had just fallen off the map, and nobody did anything about this. Nothing that could have helped, at least. He just gone. He wasn't showing up, he wasn't available, he wasn't checking in, and they were all like, okay, well, he's gone, I guess. I don't know. I guess it's not fair to say they didn't do anything, because they did attempt, Child Services did attempt to reach out to Daniel to try to find out what had been going on, why he was missing his appointments, why he wasn't showing up for court dates. But they were unsuccessful. So after several unsuccessful attempts to reach out to Daniel Groves, in May of 2019, they called the sheriff's department to have them head over, do a welfare check, and try to figure out what is going on with this family. So deputies did head on over. They went to the trailer that Daniel presumably lived in alone, not with Jessica, even though, spoiler alert, she lived there. And they got no response. So they actually went back a couple of times over the next few weeks and continued to get no response from Jessica or Daniel. Nobody was ever answering the door of the trailer. And that there was no sign of them at all. And that was until May 20th, 2019. On May 20th of 2019, police arrived again at the trailer to try to locate Daniel, to speak to him and find out what was going on with baby Dylan. And when they arrived, they actually see both Daniel and Jessica on four-wheelers out in the distance, just riding around. And they call out, they're like, hello, yo, we're here, come over, talk to us. And this is when Daniel and Jessica are like, no, and they ride off on their four-wheelers and end up disappearing into the woods and evading police. They just escape out into the woods on their property, or near their property. I don't know if they're on their property, but near their property. Then they were just gone. So at this point, police are like, what the fuck? Like, clearly something is up, because if you have nothing to hide, when the police come to your house to ask you what the heck's up, what's up with your baby, where's your baby, and nothing hinky is going on, you're not gonna run away from the police into the freaking woods and evade discussing the topic. Like, there's clearly something going on. Something is not quite right with this couple. So the police go to a judge and they get a search warrant issued so that they can go back to the house and really find out what's going on. And they plan to execute this on June 10th of 2019. When police arrive at the trailer, Jessica is arrested almost immediately. Now, I found this to be a little bit weird because I thought I read that they had a search warrant, not an arrest warrant, and those are not the same things. But they did arrest her, so there's that. Also, I don't know how they arrested her so quickly. Maybe she was in the front yard just hanging out and they just like nabbed her. I'm not really sure. All I do know for sure is she wasn't even supposed to be there, but she was, so ugh. Either way, Daniel did not go down quite as easily. He instead barricaded himself in the couple's trailer and he stayed in there for 6 hours. He was in a 6-hour standoff with police, dude. It became a big ass deal. There were the initial deputies, and then they called in a special team of officers that showed up, and then the SWAT showed up, and there was a helicopter. It was like a lot. He really was doing the most, but he did eventually surrender and was arrested. And just for those of you who are worried about this couple's teenage son, I read that he was not at the property during this SWAT raid, and I read that he had actually been taken away from the family. He had been removed from the home in April, so 2 months prior. And they didn't even have to like run into Daniel and Jessica at this time because remember, they couldn't get a hold of them. They went and picked him up at school, I believe, and just took him from the home because they were unfit parents. So Daniel Jr. was not at the home when Daniel Sr. and Jessica were arrested. While police were at the property issuing the search warrant and searching the home for things regarding baby Dylan, they actually found a stockpile of stolen goods at the house also, which is not good. And these stolen items totaled about $50,000. So that, again, is not good. And it doesn't really pertain to baby Dylan's case, but I just wanted to show you that these people were a bit problematic. And this is when this guy is on probation. And the person that's supposed to be the responsible caregiver to baby Dylan. Once in jail, the two were interrogated, obviously. Jessica was cold and uncooperative and denied any and all drug use, and also denied that she was even living in the home at the time. Though, okay, ma'am, sure. She said as far as she knew, Dylan was fine, and he was actually in the custody of child services. Though we knew that he clearly wasn't, otherwise we wouldn't be here right now having this conversation, Miss Jessica Gross. It took a while for police to get Daniel to talk, but once he finally did, he told police just the worst news that you could ever imagine. He told police that baby Dylan was dead, and he had been dead since March 28th. And remember, it's June when they're having this conversation. So for months, while Daniel was missing appointments and court dates and avoiding his at-home visits, Dylan was already dead. He just told police that the two had come home one day to discover baby Dylan dead in his crib, and they panicked, so they got rid of his body. It was all a big accident, and they hadn't done anything wrong. Oh, and another crazy thing that ended up coming out at trial is Jessica was asked at her trial later, which we're going to get into, when the injuries were caused to baby Dylan that ended up taking his life. And she said that the injuries were caused to baby Dylan on March 27th, which is the day before he died. Apparently, the day of March 28th, the day after the injuries were caused, while Dylan was still alive but slowly dying, a social worker had come to the house. This is one of the last meetings they had with a social worker, had been in the home, had seen baby Dylan, and somehow did not notice any of these injuries, left for the day, and then Dylan died shortly thereafter. And that really pisses me off a lot. Like, everything about this pisses me off, but that really pisses me off. And anyway, after he was dead, they started to panic, and Jessica told Daniel that he would be in just as much trouble as she would, even though she caused the injuries, because he was the one who had legal guardianship of baby Dylan, and that he would go to jail too. So in a panic, he decided to help her dispose of his body. Police returned to the property the following day with cadaver dogs to try to recover baby Dylan's body, but they were proving to find this difficult because the information that Daniel was giving them about where the body was just straight up lies. Like, he was telling them, like, oh, look over here, when the whole time baby Dylan was way over there, if you know what I mean. So police go back to Daniel and they're like, listen, bro, we know that you're fucking with us. We know that you're lying about where this body is, blah, blah, blah. They confront him and he doesn't crack. He's like, I don't know. This is what I thought. This is where it is. So he actually asks if him and Jessica can speak. And police are like, absolutely, yes, have a moment to yourselves. It's a great idea. And they put them in this room alone. And I don't know if these people don't think they're being recorded. We're being recorded everywhere. I'm being recorded here while I talk to you. I'm also being recorded by satellites all around me. You're always being recorded. Though I'm glad that they are dumb. They were dumb. And they were sitting talking back and forth, and Daniel tells Jessica, like, I lied to them about where the body was. And police separate them again, and they come up to him and they're like, bro, we can hear you. We know you lied about where the body is. So they push him, they push him, they push him, and he finally gives in. And this is when his information leads police to a well. A ground well 2 miles away from the couple's trailer. Police and firefighters were on site to help retrieve baby Dylan from the well, but the well was really, really out there, like out there. The fire truck couldn't even make that drive, but they had something called a brush truck, which I forgot to look up what a brush truck was, but I'll put it up on the screen. And they took this to get to the location of the well. The well was described as just a hole in the ground, not an above ground well, and it was situated on a vacant property across the street from a Bible camp. It was approximately 30 feet deep and full of water. They were able to use a pump to remove about half the water, and then they were forced to use a heavy fishing hook and some rope to feel around until they found something. Which is just so gross to me to think about, feeling around until you found something and you know that what you're looking for is a baby. And apparently it was raining that day, and as the search continued, the rain poured down harder and harder, and I just felt like that is such a appropriate thing when dealing with such a solemn event for the rain to just continue and continue. I remember I felt that way. This is so off subject, but when COVID first started, I don't know where you guys live, but the first week or 2 weeks when that big outbreak happened, it rained nonstop, and I was just like, okay, simulation, we get it. Things are solemn. And That's what this reminds me of. Eventually, Dylan's body was recovered from the well, and as I'm sure you can imagine, he was in really, really rough shape. So just a heads up, I'm going to tell you the condition of his body now. Dylan suffered skull fractures on both sides of his skull. His left arm was fractured in 3 places. He had a left leg fracture, 2 broken ribs on his left side, soft tissue hemorrhaging in his right chest wall, and a laceration to his left arm. The pathologist came to the conclusion that the injuries Dylan sustained were likely not an accident and had been sustained over at least 3 separate occasions. His death was ruled as being caused by homicidal violence of undetermined etiology. After death, Dylan's body was then wrapped in plastic bags, secured with duct tape, and then placed in 2 milk crates that were weighted down with rocks and an anchor-type weight. The crates, bound by chains, padlocks, zip ties, and metal wires, was then placed into the well. It was also found that there were drugs in Dylan's system at the time that he was killed. Could it have been transferred from mother to baby when she was breastfeeding him? I don't know, but the records showed that Dylan was bottle fed, not breastfed. And could this be just residual drugs left over in his body from when he was born? I don't know. I'm not an expert, but the pathologist seems to think that that's not possible. So, why were there drugs in this baby's body? I have no idea. All I know is that it's super fucked up. The day after baby Dylan's body was found, a candlelight vigil was held in his honor, and it was held at the Faith Baptist Church in Williamsburg, which was actually the church that Dylan's foster mother, Andrea, went to. And man, it was so sad. She was just so heartbroken, man. She really felt that at some point she may get Dylan back and may even be able to adopt him. So to learn what happened to him just completely destroyed her. She said that he was just a loving baby who just wanted to be cuddled and held and swaddled, and she didn't mind doing that all day long because she loved him. She said of Dylan through tears, and I quote, "He loved being swaddled and held close, and I did that for him for 12 days straight." She also said of the system and its failure in regards to Dylan in particular, and I quote, "There need to be changes made to the system that we have. This never should have happened. I want Dylan's life to have that purpose and that meaning to stop this from ever happening again." Both Daniel and Jessica were charged with several charges, including aggravated murder, interference with custody, kidnapping, endangering children, gross abuse of a corpse, tampering with evidence, and felonious assault, and both ended up pleading not guilty to all charges, and their trials were to be combined or heard at the same time. I think initially Jessica actually pled not guilty by reason of insanity, but she was given a competency hearing and was found to be competent to stand trial, so then she just changed it to not guilty. Shortly after this, concerned people who knew Dylan, or more likely who knew of Dylan and knew of Dylan's story, stood outside the Children's Services building and held a mini protest because they felt that Children's Services was partially responsible for Dylan's death because they had opted to take him out of his foster home where he was seemingly loved and cared for and safe, and put him back in his father's custody, which was clearly an unsafe and unstable home. People were worried that there could be more children just like Dylan in dire situations that just haven't been found yet. Baby Dylan's cousin Alyssa said of the whole horrible tragedy, and I quote, "I think the whole situation is horrible. We knew from the moment Jessica was pregnant that it would be something awful." She added, "We are both disgusted and devastated by what has happened in the past week, and we wish nothing more than the ultimate punishment to be given to these sick individuals to which we have the burden of calling family." At the actual trial, though initially Daniel and Jessica had pled just not guilty, they changed their story, and Jessica ended up actually pleading guilty and taking full responsibility for the murder, saying that Daniel had nothing to do with it, knew nothing of it, and only helped after the fact to help conceal baby Dylan's body. Jessica's defense attorney said of Jessica, and I quote, "My client, Jessica Groves, was and still is a drug addict. There is no doubt about that fact. She, and she alone, caused the injuries to Dylan Groves, which led to his death. She murdered Dylan Groves. It's a strong, strong statement from a defense attorney. Is it not? The judge asked Jessica if she was comfortable and understood the defense that her defense attorney planned to use with her. And Jessica said that she did, that she understood, that she consented, that she was planning on taking full responsibility for what happened, that it happened due to her drug use, and to take full responsibility off of her husband. The same defense counsel said of Daniel Groves, and I quote, "Once he found him, panic and confusion set in, and with that panic and confusion came poor decisions. Did he help hide the body? Yes. Did he suggest the well? Yes, he knew where this well was. Did he help craft the coffin and preserve Dylan? Yes, he did. But that's all he did." That's all. No big deal, nothing else, just those things. So that's what the trial was about. It was less about Jessica's innocent or guilt, because she was just like, I did it. And it was more about Daniel's innocent or guilt. But it came out at trial, okay, that Daniel had, you remember how he passed his drug test? That's how he got Dylan back in the first place. Well, it came out at trial because the couple's 14-year-old son, Daniel Jr., testified. It came out at trial that Daniel Jr. had been providing clean urine to his father, Daniel. He said he didn't know what it was for. He just did it. He would pee in a cup. His dad would take it. And the cops, or the judge, defense, prosecution, the court was like, why would you be doing that? And he was like, oh, it was for a friend of mine. This urine was for a friend of mine, not me. I was clean. I was good. They're like, okay. If you're clean and you're good, why couldn't you give your friend the clean urine? Because your urine's clean, right? Because you're not doing drugs. And he was like, oh, here's the thing. I did go to a party. I did go to a party recently and I smoked a little weed, so I couldn't give him urine. It also came out at trial that the couple's son, Daniel Jr., had witnessed some serious injuries to baby Dylan, particularly some very serious bruising to baby Dylan's head. And the court asked what he thought happened, and he said that his mom had made an excuse for what happened, and that he believed his mom at the time, because why wouldn't he? He's 14, that's his mother. But that he was under the impression that it was actually his father, Daniel, who had hurt Dylan, not Jessica, which was interesting. And police, or the courts, the courts questioned Daniel about this, and he said that he never remembered seeing this serious bruising on the baby's head, even though the 14-year-old son did, and said it was bad enough that it covered the whole top of his head. Wonder if that's how those skull fractures got there. And it also came out that Daniel Sr. told the court that he had witnessed Jessica beating the tiny baby before. Did he call the cops? No. Did he do anything? No. And was Jessica even supposed to be there? No. But he had witnessed her beating the baby. A 2-month-old baby. How are you going to hit a 2-month-old baby? Fucking bitch. Jessica, though she did take responsibility for what happened, she would not explain exactly what she did and what caused baby Dylan's injuries. She just kept saying over and over, I don't remember. And the prosecution, this woman, was not having it. She was just like, you don't remember. You don't remember this chain, this 6 layers of plastic and duct tape, 3 padlocks, 12 zip ties, 8 wire ties, 18 rocks. You don't remember that? When asked why Jessica and Daniel had disposed of baby Dylan the way they did, wrapping him in so much plastic and putting him inside those crates and wiring it shut and putting him in there, Jessica said they wrapped him in that way to preserve him in case for any reason that I can't imagine they ever wanted to go back and retrieve him, they could. And again, Jessica just kept saying that she didn't remember what had happened. She didn't remember exactly how she had injured him, that she must have dropped him, that's the only explanation. But there were clear time gaps between the injuries, and these clearly happened on several different days. So I really doubt that she just dropped him to break his arm and his leg and his hips. And I know that babies are fragile, but to me it doesn't seem like she dropped him. Jessica then says to the prosecution, and I quote, I have to live with this for the rest of my life. And I don't want to respond emotionally to this case, but I'm going to. I just know I am. And to that I say, good. I don't like this woman, as I'm sure you can imagine. And I'm the type of person, generally, I am known for being the type of person who is very sympathetic to the epidemic that is drug abuse and drug addiction. I actually do have a more sympathetic view to that situation, but when you murder a 2-month-old baby, that's where my sympathy ends, and that's where the line is crossed. And now, fuck you, bitch. I don't care that you have a drug problem because you killed a 2-month-old baby. The jury of 7 women and 5 men were sent to deliberate on January 10th, 2020, which was Dylan Groves' first birthday, and they took less than 3 hours to come back with their decision. Each defendant faced a total of 11 charges, including aggravated murder, kidnapping, child endangerment, tampering with evidence, interfering with custody, gross abuse of a corpse, and 4 charges for felonious assault. Daniel Groves was found not guilty on the charge of aggravated murder, but on all the other 10 charges, the jury found him guilty. Daniel was sentenced to 47 years to life in prison and will not be up for parole until he is 89 years old. Jessica Groves was found guilty on all 11 charges, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So, to recap, baby Dylan is dead. Daniel Jr. has now lost both of his parents and has to live with the knowledge that his parents murdered his little brother and that his father was using his urine to get him back in the first place. I can't even imagine how horrible and traumatizing that is for him, and it's just so upsetting and disgusting. But anyways, guys, that is the story of the murder of baby Dylan Groves. And I know that this is a heavy one. This is a very difficult case, a very heated case, and I anticipate some very strong emotions in the comments, and they're completely justified because, trust me, I feel them too. It's just like, how? How do you hurt a tiny little baby? How do you look at this little guy that you have made, that's a combination of you and your husband, and not feel this urge, this drive to protect them at all costs, and instead beat him to death, essentially? I do not understand it. I don't think I'll ever understand it. It makes no sense to me. And I understand she was on drugs, but that's your problem. And I understand that the baby was addicted to drugs, and that'll make a baby more difficult to deal with, but that's literally your fault. So, like, I don't know. Why did they even try so hard to get him back? Why didn't they just leave him with his foster mother? I don't understand that. It's just very upsetting, and it does feel like a failure of the system as well. They're not, I don't know if I'd say they're responsible for his death. I don't know where I land there, but there is definitely an issue with how that was handled, how quickly he was sent back to his dad, even though he passed a drug test. Like, what did they think was going to happen? Did they really think he was going to have her move out? And at the time, he wasn't in a great position either. He was on parole. Like, I don't know. I just don't know. It's just very upsetting, especially because it really seems like his foster mother, Andrea, like, loved him and cared for him and tried for him and gave him the safe and comfortable home and held him when he shook because he had tremors from his mom doing drugs when she was pregnant with him. And they just took him out of that safe environment and put him back in that home. And then he was murdered, and in such a horrible way. He was beaten and broken and bruised, and he was only 2 months old. Okay, I got enough. For anyone that's wondering, the last report I saw is that Daniel Jr. is staying with family. I don't know what his long-term situation will be. He'll be an adult soon. Hopefully he's getting the help he's going to need, some sort of counseling, because it's going to be a hell of a time living with all of that knowledge for the rest of his life. So good job for his parents on that too. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and it gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering baby Dylan with me today. What happened to him is so unimaginable and unthinkable, and really just too much, right? I can't even get too far into it, honestly. It's just too upsetting. But I do want to know what you guys think. I want to know if you guys think that the ruling was fair, one, I think it was. If you do think that Jessica was totally responsible, or if you think that Daniel was responsible as well, and also if you think it actually was Jessica who caused all those injuries, or if you think that it's possible that she was taking the fall for both of the parents. I don't know. And I'm curious as to what you think and where you land on that. And I think we should just get into it. So come, gather around, and let me tell you the tragic story of the murder of 5-year-old Timothy Wiltsey at the hands of his own mother. Timothy William Wiltsey, known affectionately by his nickname Timmy, was born on August 6, 1985, making him a Leo, and he was born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Timmy was born to young parents. His mother, Michelle Lodzinski, was only 17 when she gave birth to her son Timmy, and his father, George, was a teenager as well, George Wiltsey. That's where he got the last name Wiltsey, obviously. And when the two met, George and Michelle was only 14 years old, so it was a very, very young romance. He was from Iowa and she was from New Jersey, but each summer she would come out and visit her brother who lived in Iowa, who owned a home that was just down the street from George's house. So the two would always have a little summer romance. Every time she would come to visit, they would meet up, and the relationship lasted several years, long distance. Long distance is hard for any couple, and especially when you're that young, because everything is more intense, but the two did everything they could to make their young love work, with her coming and visiting him in Iowa each summer, and then he would come to New Jersey and stay with Michelle and her family. At one point, he even came and stayed for an entire month, and after that month-long trip, George actually moved to Long Island. So he left Iowa and moved to Long Island. It was while George was living in Long Island with his uncle that he learned that while he had been staying with Michelle and her family for that month, he had gotten Michelle pregnant. So they were like, okay, we gotta really think about how to be responsible here. And after considering all of their options, George thought the best thing for them to do would be to move together back to Iowa to start their family. For a small time when Michelle was pregnant, she did move to Iowa with George. She wanted to live with him and to try to raise their family together. She didn't really want to move to Iowa. She was really happy with her family in New Jersey, but George and her talked, and he convinced her that this was the best place for them to start their family together. It was a small town, it had a very small town safe feel, and it also had good hospitals for her to give birth in. And plus the two, though young, were so in love with each other. They were obsessed with each other and couldn't get enough of each other, so they moved together to Iowa to start their family, and once there, they welcomed their first ever baby, their only baby that they'd have together, little Timmy. It didn't take long, however, for Michelle to realize that her life with George wasn't really what she wanted. She didn't like Iowa. She did not like the small town feel. She missed New Jersey, and she missed her friends and her family and having things to do, and honestly, she was probably a little bit lonely because she was a new mother, which is already a big thing when you're a teenager. She had moved to this place where she didn't know anybody. She didn't have a lot of friends or family. Like, her brother lived in Iowa and stuff, but I feel like motherhood is very isolating already without, the added giant move and lack of that safety net, community net. And George was always gone at work. He was the sole breadwinner. Babies aren't cheap. And I think that was just very lonely for her. And in addition to that, George has said himself that towards the end, the couple did fight a lot, and at least on one occasion it did get physical. So it sounds like it just wasn't the move, So suffice it to say, it just really wasn't what she wanted. And when Timmy was just 6 months old, Michelle and he were picked up by a family member and moved back to New Jersey, and the relationship between her and George effectively ended. In the romantic relationship ending between George and Michelle, so did George's relationship with his young son Timmy. And why this dissolve happened between the father and the son is up for debate, and it depends on who you ask. According to George himself, he wanted to have a relationship with Timmy. He loved Timmy, but Michelle told him she wanted nothing to do with him and wanted Timmy to have nothing to do with him. He says that he sent cards or, toys, stuff on the birthday, and she would just send it back. It's one of those things. For me, and maybe this is just like the woman in me, if the rules were reversed, I would do anything I could to see my kid. I'm not going to let some person say, I don't want you involved. I would be like, well, that sucks for you, because I'm gonna be. But what we do know is when Michelle left with Timmy, when Timmy was 6 months old, that is the last time that George ever saw his son. So now we're going to hop in our handy dandy time machine and we're going to head to 1991 in South Amboy, which is a small town in New Jersey with a lower than usual crime rate when compared to the other cities in the area. So it's just like a nice, safe, wholesome place to start a family, raise kids, and live. Michelle, now 23, is still a single mother raising her one child, Timmy, who at this time is 5 years old, and Michelle is working as a secretary to make ends meet. Timmy is attending kindergarten at this time at the St. Mary Elementary School, and he is just known as being like a sweet boy, a shy boy with just an adorable smile and a head of light brown hair just like his mother. He was just a sweet kid who loved animals. He had a pet cat that he slept with each night, and he had this weird little habit of sleeping with his shoes on. He loved ice cream and fire trucks and Ninja Turtles. He was just like a little 5-year-old baby boy, dude, just a little boy. During the Memorial Day weekend on May 25th, 1991, a call came into police that there was a missing little boy. It was a cool night in late spring, and the boy had gone missing from a carnival that was hosted by the South Amboy Elks Club at the John F. Kennedy Park in Sayreville, New Jersey. An officer arrived and he approached a seemingly frantic and hysterical Michelle. She told officers then that at approximately 7:30 she had been in a line for a ride with Timmy and had wanted to go buy herself a soda. So she left her 5-year-old son at the ride and went to buy a soda. And when she came back, he was just gone. So police are like, okay, he's probably like a missing kid at a carnival. He's probably just hiding somewhere. So they shut the carnival down and they search it extensively. And at first they're just, looking in nooks, looking in crannies, like trying to find where he's hiding. And then they're starting to realize, okay, this is a little more serious. So they start like really searching. They bring in dogs, helicopters. They're searching like the ponds around the park. They're looking everywhere for him. During the search, they brought in canines, like scent dogs, to try to locate Timmy's smell, but Michelle didn't have anything on her that belonged to Timmy and would have his scent. So a volunteer firefighter who was there during the search offered to drive her home to go pick something up of Timmy's so the scent dogs could try to find him. So they go, okay, and they drive to the house and she picks something up of Timmy's, and then on their way back, you would think she'd want to hurry, right? You'd think she'd want to get back immediately to where her son had just disappeared from, but no. On her way back, she's like, okay, can we please stop in at this bar because my boyfriend works there, my ex-boyfriend actually, wasn't even her boyfriend at the time, and I want to go tell him so he can come help us search. So this man drives over to this bar and she goes in by herself and she's in there for 15 minutes, dude. 15 minutes before she comes back out alone. And this guy doesn't even come back with her to search for Timmy. Anyways, they go back to the park, they conduct the search, and they don't find him anywhere. And finally, the search is exhausted at about 1 a.m., so an officer drives Michelle home, and when she gets there, her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend is just sitting on the stoop waiting for her, waiting to help her and console her in this time. And Timmy was just gone. This 5-year-old boy is just missing, completely gone without a trace, a week before his kindergarten graduation. The following day, bright and early, the searches continue with so many people showing up to try to help find Timmy, and people who were there at the searches reported that Michelle just didn't seem to act the way a woman, a mother who was missing her 5-year-old child would act. She seemed disconnected and disinterested, and I know everybody responds to trauma in different ways. And when she was, challenged on her actions, she said, "I don't show emotions in public, and I don't think I should have to because someone wants me to." Which is fair, but if this was like the one thing that made her look sketchy, then maybe it could be forgiven. But trust me when I say this is not the one thing that's going to make her look sketchy. As the days continued, people were searching for Timmy everywhere. This case was extremely publicized. There were searches just conducted everywhere, like thousands of missing persons flyers were passed out, and everyone was on the lookout for Timmy. The flyer described him as 5 years old, standing at only 3 feet tall and weighing 45 pounds, and that he went missing wearing a red tank top, red shorts, and little Ninja Turtle sneakers. And man, I don't know what it is about hearing little Ninja Turtle sneakers, but it like kills my heart. Because it's a little baby boy, you know? I don't know. Look at, this is why I don't do kids. No. No. This case was so highly publicized and so highly known at the time. It was featured on America's Most Wanted. Milk cartons were like just covered with Timmy's smiling face. Like, I don't feel like I can stress enough just how big this case was and how like publicized it was. Everyone was looking for this kid. Everyone knew he was missing. And it's especially sad when you see sometimes how other missing persons cases are handled. Every case should be handled the way this case was handled, because the community should just always band together like this when a person goes missing. Because I mean, I read that like 25,000 railway workers, you know, trains going from state to state in 13 different states, all received a copy of Timmy's missing persons flyer. I believe it was with their paychecks. And Timmy's face was like on the big screen at Yankee Stadium. Like, they wanted to find this kid. Everyone wanted to find this kid. And he was just gone. So with the publicity and the media on this case, police like really cracked down. They took it extremely seriously, and they immediately started trying to look into suspects and eliminate suspects. And of course, one of the very first places they went was to George Wiltsey, Timmy's father, because that's like the first logical step. See if maybe there was some sort of custody issue. Maybe he did want Timmy and just went and took him. But when they went and spoke to him, they found that his alibi was airtight. He was nowhere near New Jersey on the night that Timmy disappeared. And it's just so sad for this guy, dude, because he learned about his son being missing the following day when police came to question him. Michelle didn't even bother to call him and tell him. And I feel like that's really sad. I get it. You don't have a good relationship. You don't talk. But in this sort of situation, like, I think it's kind of your job to call your ex. No? But then again, this is the woman who ended up being found responsible. So her moral compass isn't due north. They also looked into Michelle's on-again, off-again boyfriend, the one that she went and saw at the bar that night. His name was Fred, but it was found that he had a strong alibi as well, as he was working at that bar that night and never even came to help in the searches. In investigating the case and looking into Michelle's story of what happened that night, it was quickly found that her story didn't quite add up, and it was starting to crumble. Police started questioning people who were at the carnival, and it turned out there was no proof that Timmy was ever even at the carnival. No one there remembered seeing Timmy, and one woman even remembered being at the carnival and talking to Michelle, talking and standing for a prolonged period of time, and Timmy wasn't there, and Michelle wasn't stressed about Timmy. She didn't seem like he was missing or she was distressed. She was just casually talking with no child with her. Police then went through video footage and camera footage and pictures that people had taken at the carnival, and Timmy showed up nowhere. So police start to question witnesses, and they realized that the last time anyone other than Michelle had actually seen Timmy was at 1 p.m. that afternoon. So police are like, okay, we need to start looking into the hours of 1 p.m. when Timmy was last seen by anyone but his mother, and 7 p.m. when Michelle said she and Timmy arrived at the carnival. Police questioned Michelle to just kind of, find out what the two did that day, and she said that she and Timmy had gone to a park in Homedale. They had parked their car in a parking lot and had gone over to play and see the animals, and after that they had headed over to the carnival. But when police looked into this to corroborate her story, they found that the specific parking lot that she said that her and Timmy had parked in was actually closed that day, so there's no way she could have parked there. And of course, maybe she was just confused about which lot she had parked in. She's a human. Human error is a thing. But when you combine that with the rest of her crumbling story, it just starts not looking good for Michelle, and it only starts to look worse for her from there. The energy and opinion just started to shift around Michelle. Her story wasn't making sense. She had like a super weird sort of casual attitude about the fact that her only child, a tiny little 5-year-old, is missing. She didn't seem super anxious to like spread the word or conduct searches. She was just disconnected altogether when it came to Timmy's disappearance. And because of this, investigators started to look at her more thoroughly. They gave her polygraph tests, which she failed. And when they started to push her, her story started to change. Less than a month after Timmy had gone missing, the police called her in to question her again on her story, and she had completely changed her story. Where before she had said that, she had been waiting in line with Timmy and had wanted to go get a soda. When she came back, he was just gone. Now she was saying that she had left Timmy in line to go get a soda, but when she came back, there was a man taking Timmy off of the ride. She then said that when she approached this man, he held a knife to Timmy and said that if she came any closer or screamed or brought any attention to them, he was going to kill Timmy. She says that then he met up, like he was met by another man, and the two ran off into the night with Timmy in their little arms, right? And when police tried to push her on this and like question her further, like, what are you talking about? This is totally different. She got mad, she got defensive, and she left the interview. So that's weird, right? So for the last several weeks, you've known about this abductor and just kept that information from the police, even though it could have helped you find your son faster, right? Like, that's weird. That's a weird thing to say. It's a weird thing to do. But it's gonna get even weirder. You just wait. She returned to the police station the following day, and she said, you know, forget that story I told you yesterday. That was a lie. That never happened. I don't know why I did it. Forget that pesky kidnapping business with that guy. I'll tell you what really happened. Now she's saying that while she was at the carnival, she ran into a woman that she knew from a previous job, a woman named Ellen. Ellen was at the carnival with two men and her young daughter when Michelle was like, man, I really want a soda. And Ellen's like, go get your soda, girl. I will watch Timmy for you. No big deal. She then said that as she went to go walk away, one of the men that was with Ellen pulled out a pocket knife and held it to Timmy and threatened to kill Timmy if she reacted. So she never made it to the soda stand. The guy pulled a pocket knife, threatened to kill Timmy. And then the two men, Ellen, the little girl, and Timmy all ran off into the night. What? What is that? What even is that story? How is that one better than the last one you told? I don't understand. And if that's already not bad enough for you, like those two stories, apparently she told her ex-boyfriend Fred yet another story about what happened that night. She told Fred that she had been at the carnival and she had run into her friend Ellen, who was just there with her young daughter. So there's no two men in this story. And that Ellen was like, oh crap, I ran out of money and I want a soda. So they all walked to Ellen's car. Why did Michelle and Timmy go? I don't know. They're all friends. They all walked to Ellen's car. And when they get to Ellen's car, Ellen pulled a knife on Timmy and grabbed Timmy and pulled Timmy into her car and then took off into the night with Timmy. So with all of that, she looks really bad, right? And police really, really suspect her, but there's no evidence to tie her to any crime. Timmy's body hasn't been found. He is just missing. He is just gone. The case goes cold. There's no new tips. There's no new searches, and it stays cold for a couple of months. 5 months after Timmy went missing in October of 1991, there is finally a break in the case. A man named Dan O'Malley was exploring the marshlands area of the Raritan Center Business Park when he found something he did not expect to find. It was a child-size Ninja Turtle sneaker that was just laying in the wooded, leaf-covered grounds. And as you may recall on the missing persons flyer, the last thing that Timmy was reported as having been wearing included little Ninja Turtle sneakers. And this guy, since this case was so heavily publicized, remembered that and was like, oh crap. So he scooped up the shoe, it was just one shoe, and he went straight to the police station with it. The shoe was tested for DNA, but there was no evidence to suggest that it had belonged to Timmy, and when it was shown to his mother, Michelle, Michelle said this shoe did not belong to her son. So with no evidence and Michelle saying, like, it doesn't belong to my son, it was stored in an evidence locker where it wasn't touched again for months, and this area where the shoe was found was never even searched. And honestly, that part makes no sense to me, especially since at this point, police are already suspecting that, like, Michelle had something to do with it. You would think they wouldn't just take her word for it, but it fell through the cracks somehow and this place was not searched, which makes me so mad. So months went by and that man, Dan O'Malley, who had found the shoe, was like, this is so weird. They never contacted me to let me know the outcome. They never even, like, asked me where I found it or had me show them anything. And so he couldn't get it out of his mind because he was certain that this was related in some way. So he did what I think was actually a pretty smart idea, and he contacted the media, and this got the ball rolling because this case was so high profile and people were so interested in it. So when he goes to the media and he's like, I found this shoe here and police didn't search, people ate that shit up. So it was front page news, and this definitely got the police's attention. And shortly after the story was put on the front page of the newspapers, an FBI agent immediately contacted Dan O'Malley and was like, okay, come show me where you found this shoe. And I just still can't believe that this place wasn't searched immediately. To me, it sounds like they only even did the search as damage control because they're like, we can't look like we're not looking at this point, but that's just my opinion. So finding this shoe breathed new life into this case. The energy and the momentum of the officers involved was reestablished, and they were feeling motivated again to start looking further into the case. So they started to re-interview family members and friends, and they asked him about the shoe, even though Michelle said it didn't belong to him. And they also asked people about the location where the shoe had been found. The Raritan Center Park, right? So they ask people about this, and they start to get some very interesting information from friends and family of Michelle and Timmy. Police find that Michelle had previously worked at the Raritan Center complex. And this was super odd for them to learn because when she was previously questioned when Timmy first disappeared, they asked for her full employment history, and she had omitted this little workplace from her history. And that, in combination with the discovery of a shoe that was Timmy's size and description of the one he had been wearing, police were starting to feel like they were right in suspecting that Michelle was involved, and that they really, really needed to search the Raritan Center Park because there was a good chance at this point they weren't looking for a little boy, but looking for a body. So the search was arranged, and the search of the Raritan Center grounds was conducted in April of 1992, and it didn't take them long to locate a second Ninja Turtle sneaker. It was really, really close to where the first one had been found. Close by, they also found a large blue and white blanket and some of the articles of Timmy's clothing he had been wearing that day. And I'm sure at this point, police are just like, they have to be dreading looking further, because on one hand, obviously you want to find this boy, but on the other hand, you know that what you're looking for is the dead body of a 5-year-old baby, and I cannot imagine what it's like to know that's what you're looking for and then to find that. But it didn't take long for that dark thought cloud in the back of their head to become a reality when they discovered a small skull and the partial skeletal remains of a small child in the Red Root Creek on the grounds of the Raritan Center complex. Through dental records, it was found the skeletal remains that had been partially submerged in the creek were that of Timothy Wiltsey, and just a year shy of him disappearing, he was found and he was dead. Timmy's death was ruled a homicide because it was clear that he didn't, wrap himself in this blanket and take himself out to this random large plot of land and just lay down and die. But what's so frustrating is because he had been out there so long, cold, alone, and in the elements, the rate of decomposition he was far too decomposed to even know what the cause of death was. Which, okay, I know there are going to be a lot of people who are bothered by this, who want to know exactly what happened and want that closure and want to know the details and specifics of how he died, but I have to be totally honest here. For totally selfish reasons in making this video, I'm kind of glad that it's not out there, because I gotta be real here. I don't want to read the details of how a 5-year-old boy was murdered. I don't want to read that. I don't want to know that. But I do understand that some people do, and that it's so frustrating that we can't know exactly what happened to Timmy. When Michelle was informed that her son had been found, she did not react. She didn't ask police any questions. She didn't ask where he was found, how he died, how long he had been dead, nothing. She didn't ask anything. Young Timmy was laid to rest on May 12, 1991, and at the funeral, attendees noted that Michelle, again, did not act like a mother who had just lost her son, who was burying her 5-year-old baby. She was calm, she was cool, and even a bit disinterested. Though police suspected Michelle, because honestly, at this point, how could you not, with all the circumstantial evidence against her and the ever-changing stories, but since there was no real evidence against her, no real evidence to arrest her, the case went cold. Timmy had been found. His story wasn't circulating around the media anymore because, once a kid's found, it's no longer newsworthy at this point. And the case just went cold, and eventually Michelle actually ended up moving. She didn't go far. She only went 10 minutes away. She just wanted to get out of the house where this had happened and where the media had hounded her previously. She just wanted to move away where people didn't know her and know what she was suspected of, in my opinion. Over a year after Timmy's body had been found, Timmy's name wasn't in the media anymore, but Michelle's name ended up back in the media. And this happened because one day, Michelle's car was found parked outside of her brother's apartment with the engine running, the doors locked, and her nowhere to be seen. Nowhere to be found. Michelle's missing. Her brother's the one who found the car, and when he found it in that condition, he realized that something must be wrong. So he called the police, and when police were called, they started looking into it, and it was found that Michelle was supposed to be at work that day, but had never shown up, so Michelle was reported as a missing person. And of course, you know, this was big news because it was the mother of a murdered child, and the murderer still hadn't been found, and now she was missing under suspicious circumstances, and the media just eats shit like that up. It didn't take long for Michelle to be discovered, however. Michelle was found the very next day in Detroit, Michigan, and when she was questioned about what happened to her, she said that 2 police officers, I believe she said they were FBI agents, had kidnapped her, had driven her to Detroit, and dropped her off there and said that this is what she got for talking about Timmy. This is super weird, right? They kidnap her, they tell her, you know, keep your mouth shut about your missing son, but at this point, she's not talking about Timmy anymore. Timmy's out of the news, she's moved away to a place where her neighbors don't even know who she is, don't even know that she's the mother of a murdered child. Like, this is a point where she's no longer important to people. She's not in the media. So why all of a sudden would these random FBI agents just now decide, like, she needs to keep her mouth shut? So, in doubting her story, because it doesn't make any sense, police start questioning her further, and she can't prove that any of this happened. And this silly bitch ends up getting arrested for faking her own kidnapping when it is discovered that there's evidence that she bought herself a bus ticket and went to Detroit and made it all up. She made it all up. She made it all up. I also read that this woman went as far as to have fake business cards for fake FBI agents made to make her story seem more plausible, which, like, who does that? Who actually does that? Michelle does. It's crazy to me, but she didn't get away with it. She ended up being arrested. She was given 6 months of house arrest, 3 years on probation, and ordered to go undergo court-mandated therapy, which, good, because this woman obviously has issues. It sounds like she really needs attention. Like, as soon as she was out of the media and her kid had been found, she's like, I need to do something to get back into people's eyes and people's hearts and people's minds. And to then go on and say that all of this happened because of your dead son, like, using your dead child to make your story more interesting, makes me just so mad. It makes right the fuck off, Michelle. Unless, of course, everybody is wrong and you're innocent and you're just suffering, then, like, I'm sorry, but I really doubt that that's true, so right the fuck off. Over the years, Timmy's case remained unsolved and Michelle just moved on with her life. She ended up having 2 more children. She moved to Minnesota and then to Florida. She got married to a man named Harold, and I believe Harold is only the father of one of these 2 children. But, you know, that marriage didn't last. And while Michelle was pregnant with their child, she decided this relationship wasn't for her, and she up and moved back to Florida. Sound familiar? She lived a quiet and unassuming life. She just seemed like the average mother, suburban mom living in a, like, little, you know, cul-de-sac area. Her neighbors having no idea that she even had a first son, that she was the main suspect in the murder of her first child. And I assume that she probably thought she was never going to get caught. All these years had gone by and she had just gotten away with it. I just wonder if you're ever actually able to relax when you've done something like that. Like, are you ever able to just, like, accept that you've gotten away with something and just chill? Or are you always waiting for the other shoe to drop? Because the other shoe dropped for Michelle. 23 years after Timmy was murdered on August 6th, 2014, which would have been Timmy's 29th birthday. Michelle Lodzinski, Timmy's mother, who was now in her 40s, was arrested for her son's murder as she left her job in Florida. And just a side note here, I have to wonder if that was sort of planned for police, you know, executing that warrant, the arrest warrant on Timmy's birthday. Part of me thinks that maybe they had it like a week before and they're like, wait a minute, we gotta wait. His birthday's coming up. The headlines, like, that is the time, because the drama of it all. So it turns out what ended up getting Michelle arrested is that Timmy's case was one of several cold cases that investigators had been going through and re-examining evidence. And in looking at Timmy's case, they realized that they had enough evidence, albeit circumstantial evidence, to bring Michelle to trial. Now, police apparently also had evidence that they had had the entire time that had just been sitting in evidence lockers that they didn't realize was important evidence until the cold case units started to go over the case a second time. It was evidence that had been found at Timmy's murder scene, evidence that had never been released to the public and had therefore never been seen by friends and family members of Timmy and Michelle's, and just evidence that police didn't think was important to paint a full picture, but it turns out they were wrong. Michelle was held in a Florida jail without bond before being sent back to New Jersey to have the case heard before a jury. Of course, she pled not guilty to the murder of her son, and the trial was set for March of 2016, just shy of 25 years after Timmy's murder. Apparently, the piece of evidence that really broke this case open was the large blue and white blanket that was found near Timmy's body at his crime scene. When this was initially shown to Michelle, she said that she had never seen this blanket before in her life. But when Timmy's case was reopened and the cold case unit detectives started looking into the case, they started tracking people down to question them. And of these people, one was Timmy's cousin. And this was a cousin that used to babysit Timmy when he was alive. And when they showed her the blanket, she was visibly shaken. She said that this blanket was definitely Timmy's. It was from their house, and that when she would babysit him, the two of them would snuggle up together under it when they would spend time together and watch TV, read stories, things like that. Another two witnesses ended up testifying at trial that they also recognized this blanket as belonging to the household of Michelle and Timmy. This evidence ended up being extremely damning for Michelle's case, not only because she lied and claimed to have never seen it, but several people who have no reason to lie said that they saw it in your house, right? And there is no possible way for a blanket from your home to end up with your child's dead body in the freaking creek unless he had been taken from your house. This kid's not going to bring this giant blanket. It wasn't like a small blanket. It was like a big, like a comforter off of like a kid's bed. You're not going to bring that to a carnival with you, so that it didn't make sense that he was kidnapped from the carnival. It was very clear that this boy had not been kidnapped from the carnival like his mother had stated. He had been at his home when something happened to him, and when his body was transported, the blanket was taken from his home as well. It was also brought out at trial that Michelle wasn't this loving and affectionate mother like she had wanted people to perceive her as. People who worked at Timmy's elementary school said that they would see her when she would drop Timmy off or pick Timmy up from school, and she was never warm or affectionate or loving like other parents were. She never gave him a hug or a kiss goodbye. She just dropped him off and left him. Michelle's attorney tried to, of course, give up alternative theories to what could have happened to Timmy. He tried to say that it could have been an accidental death and not a deliberate death. He also tried to put reasonable doubt and make it seem like somebody else could have done it, but all of these were kind of fruitless endeavors because all of the evidence pointed directly to his client, Michelle. Now, could it have been an accident? I mean, maybe. We don't know because she isn't talking. And I mean, that's what ended up helping get Casey Anthony off for her child's death, is because people couldn't believe 100% that she did it on purpose. And I was really surprised with the outcome of this case because this case felt so eerily similar to the Casey Anthony case that I was really worried when looking into it that she would get away with this because of that reasonable doubt on whether or not it was an accidental or a purposeful death. After several days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Michelle was found guilty of the murder of her 5-year-old son Timmy, and she was sentenced to 30 years in prison with no possibility of parole. The woman who had brought Timmy into this world had taken him out, and she has never admitted as to why. Timmy's father, George, has said that he's happy that she's in jail and that she was convicted for this because even though he hadn't seen his son, the fact that he was dead and that nobody had been held responsible for it weighed on him. He said that he had always believed she was involved because nobody who is innocent lies that much, which agreed. And he had said that if she was convicted, he wanted to actually have Timmy's body exhumed so that he could be moved and be buried with George and George's family and like their burial plot and burial area, but I didn't see any updates on if this ever actually happened. And he did also state that if he ended up doing this, he wanted Michelle's family to pay for this. So he doesn't have a good relationship with Michelle's family. I've read that. There's definitely tension there. I mean, they got together so young. They separated so young. They sounded like they had a pretty relationship. So there's just, you know, tension there. Family tension is normal. And I'm sure part of it is the fact that he wasn't involved in Timmy's life as well. Now, whether that is because he chose not to be involved or if he was told not to be involved, I don't know. There's contradicting reports on that. But I do know that George didn't come to help with any of the searches. That much I know. But again, was he told to do that or did he choose not to do that? I don't know. But I just know if it was my kid and he told me not to come search for my missing child, I'd be like, suck on this, you know? But that's just me. As far as theories go, there are many and will probably always be many because Michelle is not talking and admitting to what happened. One theory is that because apparently Timmy had some health issues, they were unspecified. They just said that something with his teeth and something with his stomach, and that as he got older, it became more and more difficult for Michelle to deal with. That's what people who were around her during, you know, Timmy's life said. They said that as he got older, it was harder and harder for her to deal with, and they think that she just got tired of having to. It was also stated by people who were close to her around the time that Timmy disappeared that she had said, and I quote, "I'm a weekend mother, and I was not made for this shit." Which we'll go over that a little more during my thoughts and opinions part of this video. For a little end of the video fun fact for you, apparently during Michelle's trial, she had been being walked into the courtroom and she was all shackled up on her wrists and her ankles. And she says that police were walking her too quickly and she actually ended up falling, and apparently she sustained permanent damage to her wrist in this fall. And she ended up suing the Middlesex County Sheriff's Department, and they ended up settling with her for $25,000. I wonder what she's gonna do with that. I guess in prison, $25,000 will buy you like a lot of top ramen, but no, she'll probably give it to her 2 children that are still alive, or use it for her legal defense, because I do know that she's trying to appeal to the Supreme Court. I don't think anything's gone through yet, and I know that she did try to appeal previously, but her appeals were denied. And now that I'm saying it out loud, I don't know if that was really a fun fact or if it was just like additional information, but I feel at this point in the video, some of you would like to imagine this woman fully shackled, falling straight on her face, unable to break her fall. But that, my friends, is the story of Timothy Wiltsey, the 5-year-old boy whose murder went unsolved for 25 years before finally getting justice when his own mother was convicted of his murder. What do you think? I think it's really screwed up, dude. I think it makes me super pissed off, and I think she was definitely involved. I agree with Timmy's father that an innocent person doesn't lie like that, especially not when your child is missing, because all you would be doing at that point is slowing down and complicating the process of getting your child back. And if you weren't involved, that's all you would want, right? Like, all you would want is your baby back if you didn't do anything to him. And, you know, do I think she was alone? I don't know. I'm just not sure. I know that her boyfriend at the time was cleared and had an alibi, but I'd like to know what that alibi was. I guess the bar is the alibi, but if he was killed earlier in the day, I'd like to know what the alibi was for earlier in the day, because I do think that her stop into the bar, like 15-minute stop in the bar, is weird. Like, I could see her in a scenario where she had nothing to do with it and her child is really missing. I could see her wanting to go in there and like get him to come help her and be there for moral support, but like he didn't even come. But I can also see that we don't know what was said when she was in there, so she might have went in there and not said anything that actually made it seem like there was a sense of urgency in her that would make it so he would, like, why would he come then? I don't know what I'm trying to say. If there was ever like an emergency worth leaving work for, a missing child seems like it would be it, right? But I also read that at least what he has said is that him and Michelle weren't very serious and he didn't take the relationship serious, so maybe he was kind of like, not my problem. I don't know. That's sort of a dick move. I'm not saying he was involved. I'm just saying that, like, I really want to know what she said to him when she went inside. Did she downplay it? Did she make it seem serious? What was said? These are the questions I have, because if she downplayed it, okay, it makes sense that he didn't come. She didn't. Why didn't he come? I just have a lot of questions there, but I don't know. I don't know what my point was there. I'm just like rambling, you know? But what I do know is I do truly 100% believe she was involved. I believe that she knows exactly what happened, and I believe that she is responsible for Timmy's death. Now, do I think that the prosecution proved that she straight up murdered him? If I'm speaking from a more fact-based place and not an emotional place, Maybe not. To be honest, it reminds me, again, so much of the Casey Anthony case. And I think that if her attorney had worked harder, providing reasonable doubt for it being an accidental murder, she might have had a different outcome, like Casey Anthony did, because cause of death was never found. And in the Casey Anthony case, there was way, way more damning evidence, in my opinion, against Casey Anthony, and she still walked. So I'm super thankful that that didn't happen, because I truly believe that both of those women are responsible for their kids' deaths. And I really wish that Michelle would just say exactly what happened. But I doubt she will. I doubt she'll ever want her other sons, her teenage sons that are still alive, to know what she did. So I don't think she'll ever admit it, but only time will really tell. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope that it was interesting and informative and gave you everything you would like to know about this case. And of course, I hope it made sense. I feel like I was a little scatterbrained today. I've had like a long day, long night. So I hope that it made sense. And I hope that you enjoyed it. Obviously, I always want you to enjoy what I put out. I don't know if enjoy is the right word, because this is like a super sad case, but you know what I mean. Please let me know of any cases you would like to see me cover. Put them down below in the comment section, because as this video proves, if you suggest it to me, eventually I will try to get to it and make a video on it, because this was a suggestion from my sister/subscriber. And I know all of you are just filled with good ideas and good taste, otherwise you would not be here. Of course, if you have not already, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell, because I put out a new morbid makeup video every week, and I would love to hang out with you. And if you would like to connect more often, you can follow me on Instagram or Twitter. They're both BRATTERSTEIN, like my namesake here, and I try to respond to every single person who contacts me, because, like, you guys are cool. And with all of that said, thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That's tight. You're tight. This is tight, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.